Hey everyone, before we get started with episode 54, cards from Empire of Glass that are going to get nerfed. And just a few things to say. First of all, a huge, gigantic thank you to SRFS for editing this monstrosity of a podcast. We talked for almost 2.5 hours, and I can only imagine how much work SRFS put into making this listenable and getting it out there. So absolutely gigantic thank you. Next up, we'd like to thank our Patreons, the people who support us on patreon.com. Next, if you would like to help keep the show running, you can go to patreon.com/Friends of Eternal and donate there. So big thank you to Preweeben, Cotillion, Work Done Son, Chamomilk, Christier, D-Dub, and Yeastout for all of their support they've been giving the show over the months. They really do make it possible. They make it possible for us to compensate our aforementioned editor who puts in so much work. All right, the last thing, as always, the Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the web to talk about competitive Eternal. You can check out the link in the description. Lots of great players there. Great place to bounce ideas off of other people and learn something new. All right, without any further ado, let's get started with episode 54 of FECast, cards from Empire of Glass that will be nerfed. Hello, everyone, and welcome to FECast episode 54. Empire of Glass is now released. We are recording Monday night after Empire of Glass has been released, and there are a lot of cards. We're seeing a lot of these for the first few times. They weren't previously spoiled, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about. I am Sunyveil, one of your hosts, and I am joined by world's top 4 competitor, Stormblessed. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Sunny. As always, it is great to be here, and this set looks incredible. It has been less than 6 hours since we've seen the set. And, Sunny was at work for most of the day. Thankfully for me, it's finals week, so I have, a little bit more free time than normally I would. But the set just is this set looks like one of the strongest, most well-designed, interesting sets that we've seen. Like, way better design than Argent Depths. Like, this set has so many interesting designs, and it could be really difficult to evaluate. It could be really fun to just build and just, oh my god. I mean, it's also like, new set, honeymoon phase, but like the set just has so much going for it.
Yeah, well, I did do a draft already, and I'm not a huge fan of all of the tribal synergies in draft, but that's a topic for another day. Today, we are going to go over all the cards that we think that you should know if you're into competitive Eternal. What cards are going to be making waves in Constructed, and in particular, we're going to be highlighting cards that we think might get nerfed. I already have a few picks that I am fairly confident are going to get nerfed in the future, and a few that I just have some suspicions. So that should be a lot of fun to talk about. In addition, I should mention that to the set being released is that we do have changes to Expedition. We're not going to be talking too much about those changes today because we're just going to be talking all about the new cards. But we'll be sure to touch on it in another cast, especially if we have a tournament coming up. And I don't think we're going to have a big tournament, but for those of you who are interested in playing Tuesday Night Eternal or just playing on the ladder, we'll have some more information for you Expedition enthusiasts on another date.
Yeah, Expedition changes, I only looked at it briefly. Like, notable Expedition changes I saw is that we have the original 5 merchants, and we don't have a Harshal anymore. So those are 2 interesting changes, but, seems a lot weaker overall than we had before. So that's going to be interesting, because before it felt like a Diet throne, where now it might feel like more of its own thing. For the rest of this cast, we're just going to be going over, again, Sunny said, cards that we think are worth highlighting, worth mentioning. Of course, you can't speak about every card. There's a lot of interesting cards, so this is not a comprehensive list by any stretch. And Sunny's more inclined on which card you think is nerfed, but I have no idea. So I'm less enthused about this whole what's nerfed, because it's just the set's just so wild. There seems to be no ruffians, no maybe the first card we're going to discuss, because we are going to be discussing this in faction then power cost order. But the first on our list is probably the most likeliest candidate to be nerfed. It is Overloader. Overloader is 1 and a fire for a 1/1 Grenadin, which again, irrelevant unit type now. When you amplify a card, you get +2 power this turn for each amplify. So you can effectively generate lots of power, taking, effectively duplicate turns. If you play this and you amplify 3 times, you get 6 power, which is a lot of power. Sunny, what do you think about this power doubling monster?
Yeah, anytime you're messing with maximum power or like power you have available for the turn, you're playing with fire, and I think that's what Direwolf is doing here. So Overloader, what you can do is if you have a card like Hardiness, which is a 1-cost primal card that says give a unit +2 health this turn, amplify 1, give a unit +2 health this turn. You can essentially double your power with this. You pay 6 power for Hardiness, and you end up with 11 power free to use for another card, maybe another Hardiness. Then you can double your power again, and then you can finish someone off with a Danglo Arson or something like there's another one. What's the one that there's a really exciting card that costs 8 that amplifies? What is it called again? Or that's no. That one requires some other
Oh, no,
things.
no, you're thinking of pyrotechnics, right? Pyrotech
Yeah,
explosion,
okay, you're right.
where you generate lots of
Yeah.
power and it doubles, so it does 4 damage, then 8 damage, then 16 damage, then 32 damage. But you need lots of power to do it. One of the most interesting forms is a perhaps unassuming card called Diabolic Machinations, which is 6 shadow for a spell that says draw 2 different cards from among the top 3 of your deck, then bottom the rest. It has an amplify. Take 1 damage up to your maximum HP to look at 1 additional card. Now, that card seems very slow and very overcosted for its effect. It's somewhat of a powerful effect, but it's overcosted. However, what you can do is if you play Overloader and then you play Diabolic Machinations and your opponent has no power open, you just dump the rest of your life into Diabolic Machinations, select 2 cards from your entire deck, and then hit them with a Flame Blast or the aforementioned Pyrotech Explosion. So you can effectively, at 7 power, just win the game on the spot, which is something we haven't had before in Eternal, I believe.
Yeah, this idea of finishing off with a big spell is something that we haven't had, but is something that's a possibility with this card. And just to tie it all together, there's a primal card, Realign the Stars. This is a 3-cost single primal fast spell. Draw a card with Amplify of your choice from your deck. You can just play the Overloader on turn 1, whatever. Maybe turn 2, you play something that ramps up your power. You realign the stars for Diabolic Machinations, and you Diabolic Machinations for your kill condition, and that's it. So that's a 2-card combo that kind of fuels itself. It is reliant on this unit surviving, which of course is going to be a tricky part of the equation. But boy, the power is there, and yeah, we'll talk about it more later. But I suspect that this might not be the same card a year from now.
Sonny, have we had a 2-card combo in Eternal to win the game before like this?
I mean, aside from like Fire Sigil Oni Ronin, I don't think so.
Yeah, so this is sort of a new thing for Eternal. Some people have complained that Direwolf hates combo, and I think Overloader especially shows that Direwolf does not hate combo.
Yeah, I mean, like I guess like Diogo plus Invoke the Waystones, right? Those are you only need
Oh yeah,
those
no,
2
that's
cards
true.
in order to
Yeah.
quote unquote win. Or Diogo plus tutoring for Aid of the Huru is like a big 2-card combo. So
Yeah.
there are big 2-card combos, but I think that this one is easier to get to and a lot more power efficient.
Notably, Direwolf nerfed Invoke the Waystones. I guess it was the just to generate the face on. I actually don't know why Direwolf changed Invoke the Waystones. Was it too powerful?
No, it was because it slowed down the pace of the game.
Okay. Anyways, yeah, I mean, Overloader seems really powerful, and it seems like Diabolic Machinations might be just the key to go with it. Or, potentially other moves too, right? You can play with, like, Know Thy Enemy. Know Thy Enemy can find an Overloader, or, you can amplify out Know Thy Enemy, and then, although it does kill it, so maybe you don't want to do that, never mind. I changed my mind. I just like Know Thy Enemy, let's be honest. Sonny, would you like to describe the next card for us so I stop talking about Know Thy Enemy?
Sure, yeah. So the next card on our list is Incineration. It's a 2-cost fire fast spell. It says deal 1 damage to the enemy player for each card they've drawn this turn. Amplify 3, increase the damage per card by 2. I don't think this card's insane by any measure, but it is an interesting countermeasure to a deck that's playing something like Channel the Tempest, or even a deck that is playing Petition for Silex, and then Silex Treasure Trove, and then maybe another Petition. Like, that's the one for the turn, the one from the Petition, the Treasure Trove they draw off the Silex, the card they draw off the Silex, and then like another Petition. So that's actually 5 cards. Or like Helio, right? So there are a lot of ways to draw tons of cards in Eternal. This is an interesting way to punish them, and it's just another thing that they're going to have to think of.
Yeah, I think the card that's most comparable to Incineration actually is Turn Down. Now, they don't sound that comparable because, one costs 1, the other costs 2 plus 3 plus 3, whatever. But the reason I say that they're comparable is because they do very similar things, right? They're trying to punish these draw-heavy control decks. The big difference, of course, is that Incineration is useful against more decks and, is useful at more times. Like Sunny said, the thing is that all these control decks are going to be drawing lots of cards, no matter it's through Petition and Silex, or it's through Helio, or it's through, Diana plus Silex or whatever, they're going to just draw a bunch of cards. So I think Incineration will be more consistent than Turn Down at being a countermeasure to these control decks.
Yeah, also, if you amplify it twice, I mean, yeah, that costs 7 power, that's a ton, but, like, late in the game, that could happen. Then you're dealing them 5 for each card they drew. Even if they draw a card, they play Petition, they make a treasure trove. That's 3 cards. So that's 15 damage all of a sudden. And another thing is, like, the thing about Turn Down is that cards are just generally better when they're cheaper. As you get to more powerful formats, cards, the curves just skew downward. So basically, relying on opponents playing expensive stuff is kind of difficult, and Incineration gets around that. All right, on to the next card. We have Pesky Wirechewer. This is a 2-cost 1/2 Grenadin. Summon, you may sacrifice another unit to deal 2 damage to an enemy. Nice little sacrifice outlet, and you get something out of it. Do I think it's great? Not really, but I think it could be a role player in a Grenadin deck that is looking to do something when it makes a lot of bodies.
The best way I would describe this card is being very neat. I think this card is super neat, and I really like it. I think it's adorable. Like I think I had the same reaction as Sunny. Like like I saw it as when I opened the pack, and I was like, oh, this card is cool. It's very cute. I did get confirmation that Batteries is disappointed that it is not a Grenadin rodent. It is just a Grenadin. Is it going to be busted? Probably not, but is it going to be solid? I hope so. An Expedition, certainly, with Expedition's the weaker format with less, removal, then this card can act as removal. Being a unit that also can do a thing is very good, especially if you want to have critical mass for sacrifice and for just making sure you have the units to do your stuff while slumming interactions. So I think this card will be a solid role player.
Don't need many words for this next card. Scythe Slash, it's a 2-cost fast spell that says give a unit +4 attack and overwhelm this turn, then plunder. I think that any deck that was previously playing Rampage is probably going to move on to this, just because you get a little extra damage, you get a plunder going on. The +1 health from Rampage generally didn't matter a whole ton. So we might see a little bit of this card. I'm going to go on to the next one, which is a lot more exciting. 3-cost Fire 5/5 Sentinel, Barricade Basher. Reckless, summon, discard a card. And that summon, discard a card might seem like a drawback, but anytime you have a discard outlet, I think you got to watch out, because there are so many effects there. You like, if I could just get this card into the void, that'd be a lot happier.
Yeah, this card is just all upside. Like you might think that Reckless is a downside, but Reckless prevents you from making mistakes and it makes sure that you attack with your 5/5 that you're playing on turn 3. But yeah, this card is just very solid. It's a 3-cost Sentinel with aggro stats, so the aggro Sentinels are going to like it. Potentially even Bond Sentinels are going to like it because it's a cheap Sentinel that also has high attack. Reanimator Sentinels might like it, as Sunny said, because it's a discard outlet. So it's perhaps unassuming as a design. Like it obviously looks somewhat powerful, but like the fact that it might be just like a role player in like 4 different archetypes is just a really well designed card and just seems really powerful.
There have been so many times where I've been looking at the card collection for a card that just discards a card in something like Fire or Time and just not been able to find it. Now we have Jack, so that's a lot better. But like, this card, I think I'd be more surprised if it didn't see play than if it did see play. All right, the next card, this isn't a big deal. Pyrotech Explosion, we mentioned this a little earlier. 3-cost, double fire spell, deal 4 damage, cannot be stopped by Aegis. Amplify 5, double the damage Pyrotech Explosion deals. So I think there are going to be 2 main uses of this card. The first one is going to be removing cards like Kira from play, although I think it should also not be stopped by invulnerable to damage because of stupid Silverblade intrusion, but like as a card that can remove threats that were otherwise difficult to deal with, cards that had Aegis, this does something interesting. And also, like, I don't think we have very many cards that just deal 4 damage. Like, that's kind of a weird gap that we have in fire spells. Like, we've got Seer and Torch that deal 3. We've got Obliterate that does 6, but I don't think we really have anything that deals 4. So this just might be the right amount to deal with cards that you care about while also not caring about pesky things like Bubble Shield. So there are going to be the fair ways of using this, and then there are going to be the ways like we talked about earlier, where you might amplify it a bunch of times and kill them. You do need a ton of power in order to actually kill them. You need to amplify it 3 times to kill them from 25. Which means 18 power. So you really have to work for it. But it is a single card that can deal any amount of damage to the opposing player if you've got it set up correctly.
Yeah, previously the only card we've had with this sort of stat line with cost to damage ratio has been Display of Instinct, and that card is very good if you're in Gen Ed. That was, the main go-to source of interaction because, 4 damage has good breakpoints, and not being able to stop by Aegis is a big deal because, transpose everywhere, everyone's trying to get as much face Aegis as possible, and this is saying, no, 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 opponent, I can still get you through that face Aegis you have. So, they have to have counter basically because they can't, this will get stopped by the Aegis. Getting it for 13 or plus if you amplify it twice is not going to come up outside of a combo deck basically ever, or some sort of like insane ramp deck. But it is still even possible that as an aggro deck you still can get to 8 sometimes. This basically means that you're going to always be alive because if your opponent's at less than 10, you could just be like, hey, I'm just going to keep drawing because if they're gaining life, I can just pop them on the 8, right, just whenever I want. So yeah, I'm with Sunny. This card's going to be highly impactful and see a lot of meta play. Okay, so the next card on our list is, my nickname is the Drug Lord. This is Opium the Gemblazer, because his name is Opium and he's going to blaze it. He's a 5 fire 5/5 for a Sentinel. Summon. Give one of your other Sentinels +5/+5 while you have Opium. So it's not this turn, it's forever. Then, Entomb. Deal damage to an enemy unit equal to the number of Sentinels in your Void. So this card has a lot going on to it. So if you have like an overwhelm Sentinel, it's obviously going to be better. But just suddenly making a Sentinel extra 5/5 and attacking with it, and then also having a 5/5 left over, and then if the things die, you get to then interact with your opponent's stuff, is going to just be very impactful, especially in Expedition, where, as stated, I think the removal is a little bit worse, and there are no harsh rules, because obviously the best attack against a deck playing Opium would probably be some sort of board clear. But since the board clears seem very limited in Expedition, this card might be a very key role player in Expedition, if not in Throne as well.
Yeah, so this isn't quite a 5/5 with charge. So this isn't quite Naoki. And I think Naoki would see a lot more play if it were easier to play, like if the factions aren't so ridiculous. But like Gentrix Arrill, the card that gives +4/+4, that's seen like a significant amount of play. And you could see this card doing something similar to that one. It does cost 1 more, but the buff is a little bigger. It has an Entomb effect, which I guess is good. It's also a reasonable body on its own. The dream is if you can put this on something that has double damage and overwhelm. But I did a search, and there aren't a whole ton of Sentinels with double damage. You might be able to play Groundbreaker that has been sparked into Opum and get the double damage going, although that does seem pretty tricky to me. But I think there's a fair amount of potential here, and keep that in mind if you're playing some sort of aggressive Sentinels deck.
Comparing it to Genetrix IRL is a good call there, but I think this card is a fair bit better than Genetrix, right? Yes, it costs 1 more, but obviously the big flaw at Genetrix is that it had 2 health, right? So it dies to anything. Opium doesn't die to anything. It dies to very little, actually. No like damage-based removal hits it, right? So I think just being a 5/5 is going to be a big deal for this card.
All right, you're going to have to tell me about this next one, because I don't know why you put it up here.
So this is Siege Supplier. I saw this, and I was like, I like this card a lot. It's neat. It's kind of like the Pesky Wirechewer. I think this card is just very cool. I like this card a lot. This is 6 fire for a 2/7 double damage Sentinel. Summon, put the top 2 cards of your deck into your market. Then, if there are 7 or more cards in your market, draw one of them at random. So, you're not going to play this unless you draw a card from your market, which is going to be most of the time. If you start with the normal number of 5, you play Siege Supplier, you're going to draw a card. So it's kind of like a 6 cost, 4, 5, 2, well, it's a 2/7 double damage Sentinel that draws you a card, which is not terrible, I think. Double damage is relevant if you can, make that work. And I think the effect is surprisingly powerful, right? Because, you're basically going to draw cards that you want to draw. You're either drawing the card top of your deck, or you're just drawing your market card straight out. Putting the extra cards in your market isn't a bad thing either, because, just giving you more options for your merchants and other swap effects late game. You put, Torch and something else in your market, and then later on you can just get that Torch back out of your market, So I think that this card opens up options for gameplay, and I think can presents some really interesting deck building challenges.
I think this card compares very unfavorably with like Heart of the Vault, even costing 1 less now.
Yeah, that's somewhat fair. Not having warp's a big deal, but especially in Expedition. I'm gonna stick to my Expedition is weaker mantra so I can justify all the bad cards I placed. Not bad cards, weaker in comparison cards. Let's put it that way. Okay, I'm gonna move on before Sunny just starts mocking me mercilessly. So the last card, Sunny was saying why is on the list. I would like to repeat that question to Sunny. Sunny, why is Coretap Maximizer a 2-cost 1/1 a card that you think will be nerfed?
I didn't think it would be nerfed. These are just cards that we're talking about. Are we talking about cards that we think are going to be nerfed? You think Siege Supplier is going to be nerfed? Come on now. Coretap Maximizer is a 2-cost 1/1 with single time influence requirement. It's a Sentinel, has Deadly for some reason. I don't really understand why this says Deadly, but +2 maximum power while you have a Relic. So it's not hard to imagine going turn 1, whatever Relic, turn 2, Coretap Maximizer, and then all of a sudden being able to play a 5-drop on turn 3. So I think that this is going to be a huge part of the Sentinel deck because it's going to get you to your more expensive Sentinels. The question is just a matter of if you can get that Relic going early on, because if this is just a 1/1 Deadly, it's not that great. But if it gives you +2 power, it does something that no other 2-drop can really do. And I think that's pretty interesting.
I'm not too convinced about this. I know that in the past, Sunny has said that Trailmaker is not a very good card, and I think this card is going to be oftentimes just a worse Trailmaker. There are some 1-cost relics that we've seen as, in Justice. There's that specific one that I can't remember the name of, but it allows you to ramp out to a Justice Sigil if you have a Sentinel, that you could play that into Coretap. But especially if you're playing this in a ramp deck, you're probably also playing power that comes into play depleted. Like if you're playing a Crest, you obviously can't play your 1-cost relic into this. And if you're not playing Crest and you're ramping, then that's also kind of a slightly weird space to be in. So Deadly's a lot better than having a +1 attack as a Trailmaker is. But I think that this is basically going to be Trailmaker.
I mean, I don't remember calling Trailmaker not that good. I've played so many Trailmakers in like during my time playing Eternal, and it's just like I'm so willing to go down that route.
Didn't you say you didn't like Trailmaker? Maybe it was someone else who didn't like Trailmaker.
It must. I have a very high opinion of Trailmaker, and basically always have. So,
okay.
I mean, it's possible that like it was bad in the meta.
That's good. I've also had a high opinion of Trailmaker, so I don't like when people get down on Trailmaker. I'm like, Trailmaker's fine. Look at it. It gives you an influence. It's fine. Anyways,
back to Coretap Maximizer. Even if you play a Relic on turn 2 and then play this on turn 3, you're threatening to play a 6-drop on turn 4, which is what you want to do in a ramp deck anyway. So,
yeah, that's fair.
It's especially if it's in Expedition, like where your choices are more limited. It's not too hard to imagine this being okay. In Throne, I don't think that we're getting there in Throne. I think that there are just better options, including like Initiate of the Sands.
I mean, the interesting thing is in Expedition, how many incidental ping effects, how many small like the answer for this card in Expedition is going to end up being what's the removal looking like, and we haven't delved too heavily into what the removal Expedition is. But yeah, I guess I can sort of see. I'm still not completely on board. The next card is another card that I also am not completely on board with. I don't really know why it's here either. This is a 2 in a time for a fast spell, Glimpse Another Age, Voidbound, shuffle a void of your choice into its owner's deck. Sunny, why is this card that looks to me like a 2-cost do nothing here?
Well, how many times have you played Lumen Reclaimer, or seen Lumen Reclaimer be played? This is a better Lumen Reclaimer. It's a good time option to hose Void decks. That's all it's going to be. It's just going to be a check against the Void decks, but I think it's better than a lot of the current options, including any deck that wants to play Reclaimer.
I'm actually curious about that. I'm willing to be convinced. I thought Lumen Reclaimer was better because it gave you board presence while also emptying the Void. Versus like a mill deck, you want to also have that board presence. You don't want to just do nothing.
If you're playing against a mill deck, they're doing nothing until they do something out of the void. So like any board presence that you already have is going to be useful. You don't need another random 4/4 that's clunky alongside it. If you play a Alhead on turn 2 or whatever, right, then you're just going to attack with that all game, and it's going to kill them eventually. You just, on turn 5, you finally draw your merchant. You merchant for Glimpse Another Age, and then you're set for the rest of the game. Game's over.
Yeah, I guess the fact that you don't have to set up in advance, you can just play it on turn 5 with a merch. Especially, it is also fast, which is very notable because versus say like a Reanimator deck, if they play Grasping at Shadows, you play this in response, and then you basically get to counter their grass. So you know what? You actually have convinced me. I think this card is going to be better than Lunar Claimer.
But you know what? Like, the fact that it's fast is actually just going to cause more people to screw it up, because people are going to play, like, hold it up, and then someone's going to play Vara, and it's like you're not going to get a window to play it, or people are going to play Katra, and you're not going to get a window to play it.
Oh man, if your opponent's on the Xenon Reanimator version of the deck, you probably want to play this on your turn, not on their turn. The next card on our list is part of the Mandrake package. There's a number of these Mandrakes that all sort of have... Mandrakes are ultimate themed, based because, you know, we had Marius Mandrake, and that was sort of the signpost saying that, hey, Mandrakes are probably going to be ultimate based. This is Vine Tangler. It is a 4x2/4. When you play an ultimate ability, play a 3/3 Mandrake. Ultimate, pay 7 to give your Mandrakes +1 attack and killer. Now, I haven't tested the card out for sure, but I'm going to guess that if you activate the ability, you probably get a 4/3 killer Mandrake, because otherwise that would be kind of a feels bad for the card. It wouldn't be a very good story for the card. So I'm guessing that the pay 7 gives you a 4/3 killer, and the Vine Tangler itself becomes a 3/4 killer. Have you tried the card out? Can you confirm or deny this?
Yeah, I actually had this in the draft that I was doing before the cast, and it does work that way. So I think, like, with this card, I don't think it's insane, but like the Mandrake deck is kind of explosive when it works. So there's a card that says ultimate, when you gain health, do something. So I can imagine something like playing that card, then this card, then playing a power that gains you health or something, then all of a sudden you're starting to build your army. The fact that you can repeatedly get the 3/3s is pretty nice. Although, to be fair, it is very, very weak against board clears.
But as I said, Expedition board clears I think the only board clear that costs 9, which is basically doesn't cost anything because it doesn't exist. And then you have the Cyber Combustion, which we'll get to in a bit. The card Sunny is talking about is a Venomous Nightshade. It is a 3 and a Xenon for a 3/3. When you play an ultimate ability, your Mandrakes get +1 attack and deadly. Ultimate, when you gain health, play a 0/2 Little Seed. So, you play Venomous Nightshade, you play Vine Tangler, you gain some health, and then Venomous Nightshade procs, giving you a Little Seed. Then all of your units get +1 attack and deadly. And then all of your units also get +1 attack and killer. So you end up with a 5/3 deadly killer, a 4/4 deadly killer, and a 2/2 deadly killer. So, that is a pretty snazzy little curve right there. We don't have Xenon Painting, sadly, so you can't play like Venomous Nightshade into Xenon Painting, unfortunately. But I assume there's still ways to make that work.
It sounds like Expedition's going to have a plant problem to me.
Okay, so the next cards, well, it's sort of a card, sort of a package deal. I'm interested in discussing the Amplify package. So the two cards I've chosen to sort of exemplify this sort of Soldier Amplify sub-theme we have going on is Bastion, Garrison, and Tactical Superiority. Both 4 cost. One is 4 time for the Garrison. One is 4 primal for this Tactical Superiority. And Bastion Garrison is a relic. Your soldiers have +1/+1. When you amplify a card, play a 2/1 soldier for each amplify, so you get 3/2 soldiers every time you amplify. And then the flip side of this, because it's sort of like that's sort of like the aggro version, and sort of like a more control version is Tactical Superiority, which is 4 primal for a spell, kill each stunned unit, amplify, exhaust a soldier to draw a card. So I'm curious, Sunny, what do you think about this Soldier Amplify sub-theme that's sort of going in 2 directions, sort of like this sort of aggro route and this sort of control route?
Seems pretty slow to me. I haven't been very impressed by a lot of the Amplify cards, so I'm not too interested in it, but I'm curious to see what you have in mind.
So I'm not so sure about the Bastion Garrison part. It really depends on what Amplify cards also exist that are incidentally soldiers and stuff, right? Like, what's sort of the incidental part of this? I'm a little bit more interested in the Tactical Superiority side of things. We've seen a number of stunning enemy unit stuff in the Soldier Tribe, new stuff that we've gotten. Imagine this, a 4-cost spell that kills things situationally, that amplifies to give you card advantage. That sounds like Know Thy Enemy. So
wow, you're comparing this to Know Thy Enemy? Holy cow, this is way worse than Know Thy Enemy.
I do think it's a lot worse, but I think it's interesting enough. I think it really depends on the amount of soldiers that are sort of good in a control-y form of a deck. Can you reach enough stuff? Like, is there just enough sort of incidental good things that can sort of pile on?
I'm so skeptical of this. You're talking about a control deck that's relying on blocking because, like, you need the soldiers. The thing that makes Know the Enemy good is that you recoup the resources that you spend to draw cards immediately because it plays the units, and it can play units of any type as long as they cost 5 or less. And there are lots of great units that you want to play that cost 5 or less. You're restricted to a singular unit type with this card, Soldier, and you're not recouping the tempo loss immediately, which you do with no other enemy. So yeah, I'm super duper low on this card.
I'm also somewhat skeptical, but like I'm a little bit more bullish on this. I think there's a chance. I think there's an outside chance it makes it. I kind of also wanted to discuss the sort of Soldier Amplify sub-theme for a bit. Okay, speaking of actually good Amplify cards, we have Send an Envoy, which looks amazing. This is 6 time for a spell. Play a 5/5 Sentinel Exhausted. Amplify. Play a power card from your hand to play an additional 5/5 Sentinel also exhausted. So if you have 5 power in your hand, you play this card, you play all 5 out, you get 6 Sentinels. Most likely you're not going to have that. Let's say the case you care about is if you have 2 power in hand. If you have 2 power in hand and one of them's a Silex, you can play this, play your 2 power, get your treasure trove, and get 3 5/5 Sentinels on the board. You can also play like Cast Iron Furnace if you have those in hand to get 5/5 Dragons as well. I think this card looks really good to me. Sunny, what do you think of Send an Envoy?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's necessarily great, but it might be good enough. I think it might be good enough. It's definitely expensive, and the fact that these Sentinels are exhausted and this is a slow spell, so you can just walk into a sweeper, obviously is not great. And you have to have 6 power in play. With the more power you have in your hand, the better. So it is difficult on that perspective, but it is really powerful. I mean, it's not impossible to imagine a situation where you can put 4 bodies into play and getting the effects of having 4 powers into play. Like, I think if you can figure out ways of protecting yourself, like if you can put in Amber Waystones or something to gain life so that you can survive the turn and get to the point where you're attacking with the next ones, or like powers that do things like Silexes that help you draw cards in case you're walking into a sweeper. So
like Cast Iron Furnace?
Yeah, Cast Iron first. That definitely is a possibility. That seems a little like unnecessary because you're already getting the bodies. I guess Cast Iron First does let you have a readied unit that can block, right? And that's a big deal. So, yeah, it's definitely like this is the type of stuff that I like playing around with. Is just like strategies that involve using big power and getting lots of power into play. So I think it's going to be fun. And we'll see if it's good enough. And I think there's an outside shot that it is.
But Sunny, I need to mention one other thing about this. Do you know of a card, a deck that likes having lots of power and also cares about having big spells, maybe spells that cost 5 or more?
Oh God.
It's a Volatility card, everyone. Volatility wants to get rampant. It wants to have power in hand. It wants to play big spells. I'm going to be playing Volatility, Send an Envoy, and it's going to be great.
50 power Volatility, Send an Envoy. I'm willing to try it. Not. 50 power.
I'm not playing 50 power. God.
Fine, 48. 48 power. Okay, 12 sets of cards. All right. This next card I think is sneaky good, and I think this is actually one of the best cards in the set. I am willing to be very wrong because there aren't very many cards like it. This is Builder's Decree. It's a 1-cost spell, Injustice. It says, choose a non-power card from the enemy player's hand. They can't play cards with that name for 2 turns. Amplify 4, play a Sentinel with attack and health equal to your maximum power. So I think this is basically a split card. You have a 1-cost, choose a non-power card, and your opponent can't play it for 2 turns. And you've also got a 5-cost, make a 5/5. That doesn't seem like a whole ton, but I mean, I think there are going to be situations where you're playing an aggro. Like I think this is an aggressive card, by the way. In order to get as much as you can out of the delay, I think that you definitely want to be aggressive. There are going to be situations where you just you've built up a big board, and instead of trying to hold up for Stand Together or something, you could play a 4-drop in the Builder's Decree to make sure that they can't play Harsh Rule on the next turn. And then they're probably just going to die without their sweeper. There's also probably situations similar to that where your opponent just needs to play one of their removal spells, whatever their most efficient removal spell is, and they can't if you choose it with Builder's Decree, and by the time they'd be able to play it, it's too late and they're dead anyway. So I think it's really interesting that they're giving a card like this to Justice, whereas effects like this have typically been in Shadow. But man, like a Rakano or Combray aggro deck, I could see this being backbreaking for that effect. Now, you might be like, okay, Sunny, like Sabotage isn't the biggest deal. We've had Sabotage before. But also being able to use it as a 5 cost, make a big unit. Like when you can't curve out and kill them, having a backup plan, make a big unit, I think is really good. So the plan A, I think, is going to be extremely good, especially for a faction that doesn't normally get it. And I think the plan B is going to be enough of a pain that this card, well, I think this card is extremely powerful.
Yeah, we were discussing this card pre-cast, and I hadn't really looked at it too carefully. I was like, oh, this card's neat. And then we were talking about it, I was like, oh wait, the more I thought about it, the more I like the card. I just want to clarify that Justice has seen a bunch of these effects. Shadow gets the discard effect. Justice gets Bar the Gates, Valkyrie, Justicar, reinforcements. Justice gets your opponent can't play specific cards for a limited number of times. Justice gets this effect in spades, actually.
But this is way different because this costs 1 and all those other cards are super expensive.
Bar the Gates, doesn't Bar the Gates cost 2?
Oh, you're right. It does cost 2.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think that like Bar the Gates has the problem that I was just discussing, where if it's late in the game and you need a threat, it's not going to do anything for you.
So my point there wasn't that the card is not way better than Bar the Gates, because the card is just insanely better than Bar the Gates. My point was that Justice gets this effect in spades. It's important to note that when you amplify it for 4, you also still get the Bar the Gates effect. So you can get a 5/5, a 6/6, etc., while still denying your opponent the ability to play a card in their hand. So it's not like an either or situation. It's you can either pay 1, or you can again, that's what amplify does, right? But and then if you amplify at 9 somehow, you get to make 2 of them. Although that's not going to happen. Although it could happen a lot, because I think the card's actually just really good if you think about it. Denying it for 2 turns could be very relevant. Just playing 9, making 2 9/9s while also denying them some tempo is just gonna maybe just be very good in a control deck of some kind. It is interesting because unlike say the Shadow discard effects, if they have multiple harsh rules in hand, you stop all of them. You don't stop just one, because they can't play cards with that name. So if they have 3 slays in hand, you can stop all of them. So I think this card being either a 1-cost version of Bar the Gates, 1, you can squeeze in an aggro deck. 2 is actually a significant portion of your turn. So I think this being a split card of being a 5/5+ that says summon, your opponent can't do a thing, like a Valkyrie Justicar, but with actually good stats, while also masquerading as a 1-cost piece of disruption. So I think this card, basically Sunny talked me into how good it was, and I'm fully on board. That card looks incredible.
Yeah, like your opponent goes to the market, you builders decree them. Like, what are they going to do? Like, they're not going to malediction you. That's not what's going to happen. Or like you're playing against any combo deck, and they get to the point where they can go off, and you're just like, wait another 2 turns, I'm going to kill you. Yeah, I think this card is going to be fantastic. It's we'll talk about later, but I think this card might get nerfed.
Yeah. So the next cards, I guess that maybe I should discuss them with the Basher earlier, the 3-cost 5/5. This is sort of the sort of aggro Sentinel package. We have a number of these, but the 2 cards I just wanted to highlight briefly were Bastion Gatekeeper and Forge Sanitizer. So Bastion Gatekeeper is 2 and a Justice for a 3/1 Summon Plunder. Once per turn, you may pay 3 to double Bastion Gatekeeper's attack and health this turn. And then Forge Sanitizer is 3 and a Justice for a 1/1 Regen, and +4/+4 and flying, while you have a non-weapon relic in your void. So if you have a regular relic in your void, you have a 3-cost 5/5 flying regen.
Yeah, I'm not too excited about Bastion Gatekeeper, but Forge Sanitizer looks interesting. I mean, if you have a 3-cost 5/5 flyer, that's great. It has regen. Okay, excellent. And it's not too hard to imagine, especially with some of the other cards we're going to look at, to have a relic that ends up sacrificing itself, or just a relic weapon that goes to the void. Oh, sorry, non-weapon relic. So that's not going to work. But there are relics that sacrifice themselves. We saw one earlier that we mentioned last week, right? The 1-cost relic. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you play a Sentinel,
yes,
like Forge Sanitizer, it sacrifices itself. You get the Justice Sigil, and it becomes a 5/5 flying.
The other way to put relics in your void would be to, I don't know, maybe discard them incidentally. Some sort of downside on a 5/5, maybe. If you use like a Basher or an Auto Treader to throw a relic in your void, and then suddenly this card can pop off.
Oh shoot! I just remembered. So with the one the fire card that discards, that's like prime fodder for open the gates, open the vaults.
Oh yeah,
open that praxis card.
Unlock the vault.
Yeah. Oh man, that sounds so sweet.
Yeah, so I just want to mention Bastion Gatekeeper, especially I guess in Expedition, but I think even potentially even in Throne. I think it just looks like a solid role player, right? If you're building a unit-based aggro deck, you need to fill your 2-drops. And this card, potentially, if you have on turn 5, you can play the card Suny mentioned earlier in the Volcano Sentinel deck, Scythe Slash, give it +4 attack and Overwhelm, and then double its power and make it a 14 power Overwhelm card. And, that could get the job done. If you make a 14-2 Overwhelm, it doesn't matter if it dies because it's still going to kill your opponent for a bunch. And then adding Plunger on top, don't underestimate Plunger, even in Construct, right? In Draft, this card is just a very, very, very solid card. But I think can make play in Constructed too. It just seems like a solid role player to me.
Suny is not super enthused, but okay. All right, let's talk about this next one. So there's a cycle of relics that are mirrored and give both players an effect. This is what I think is potentially the best one. This is Partnership Agreement. It's a 3-cost relic for single justice. At the start of each player's turn, they create and play a Justice Sigil. I think it's pretty silly, and usually these types of mirrored effects are pretty bad, but there are, justice payoffs. We have cards that care about how much justice influence you have. I wonder if you've noticed any during your time playing Eternal. But I mean, things like Trickshot Ruffian or things like Mantle of Justice can get pretty out of hand with this, especially as time goes on and you get more Justice Sigils. For this card to be good, I think you need to definitely take advantage of the influence, especially with cards that have Surge, or if you have a card that just counts how much justice you have. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk for playability, but I think it's one of the better ones of the cycle.
I think that they're all pretty meme-tastic, except for one, which potentially might be not a meme card. I think the Shadow one's the best card cycle. We'll get to that eventually. I mean, I'm surprised Sunny didn't mention, his favorite card that cares about justice influence, Kira Ascending. He's like, what cards require justice influence? I'm gonna think about it. Mantle of Justice. I was like, Kira? Anyways, I think this card is bad. I don't like the card very much. I think Sunny does bring up a point that you definitely want to be taking advantage of the ramp and the justice influence, but the problem with these sorts of cards is obviously that your opponent gets the effect first, right? Like, you might think that this is fine versus an aggro deck because they're aggro anyways, but like letting them have the extra tempo of, you're playing a 3-cost anything relic and they get an extra power their turn, right? Because it's not depleted. So they still get to take advantage of that first in so many different ways. And then versus the control deck, you just play start Ixton control. Like, you really want to give them justice deals every turn. So I think that if it's a card that's not good versus aggro and is not good versus control, then where do you have it?
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily terrible in either of those matchups. Like, Justice has the most tools against aggro. So, like, that is something that you can prepare for. Against control, like, yeah, that does seem like an issue. You could go, like, Harsh Roll into a fast Martyr's Chains or something like that. I just think it's interesting, okay? I think that there are ways of taking advantage of a lot of Justice influence. We haven't had cards similar to this very much, and it doesn't seem downright horribly unplayable. It just seems like you have to get creative.
I'm glad that we have a couple of these on Sunny's end. They're not just all my speculative picks like Siege Supplier. So this next card is a card that I presume lots of you also think is going to be very good. This is Lord Steyer's Tower. Now, we don't see Steyer himself, but he's some sort of Minotaur. Maybe we'll see him in the next set or next mini set, whatever. Lord Steyer's Tower has Valkyrie Warp. Just to clarify, Valkyrie Warp. If you have a Valkyrie in play, you can warp this from the top of your deck. And if you do warp it, you get some sort of bonus effect. Otherwise, the card just doesn't have any effect, right? If it's in your hand, you don't get the Valkyrie Warp. It only Valkyrie Warps on the top of your deck, and if you have Valkyrie in play. So for Lord Steyer's Tower, which is 4 and a Justice for a 2-health Scythe, as you know, I love Scythes, Valkyrie Warp, you may advance Rhoda's agenda an additional time this turn. So that's a big deal because it gets you one step closer to whatever the ultimate is. Doing 2 things is going to be very, very big. So what's Rhoda's agenda? Rhoda's agenda is Steyer's Beckoning, Curfew Enforcement, and Ironclad Oath. If you're a constructed player, you might not know what any of those cards do. If you're a draft player, you might know what Ironclad Oath does, because Ironclad Oath was the 4-cost spell that gives a unit +4/+4, and then gives you armor equal to the number of Valkyries you control. Curfew Enforcement was the card that was recently buffed. It is now 1 cost for a spell that gives all enemy units -1 attack, and then has Amplify 1, Exhaust a Valkyrie, give all units another -1 attack. So if you have 2 Valkyrie, you pay 3 and exhaust your Valkyrie, all of your enemy units get -3 attack, which we've seen with Telut, that can actually be quite impactful. Now the last card, Steyer's Beckoning, is a new card. It's a common, so you can play it, but most likely you'll see it just in draft or off the site. Steyer's Beckoning is a 3 and a Justice for a spell. Play 2 Valkyrie with flying. So it's like Humbug Nest, but not fast, and it gives you Valkyrie, which is a relevant unit type for, say, Curfew Enforcement. And then Rhoda, the final unit on top of it, is a card you can't actually get any other way. You can't play it normally. Rhoda is a 7 Justice for a 6/6 Flying Endurance. At the end of your turn, draw cards until you have as many in hand as the enemy player. So against a control deck, you can then, play out your cards and then draw back up to whatever they have. Against an aggro deck, it's still a 6/6 Flying Endurance, and you get some armor off of Ironclad Oath, and you Curfew Enforcement to knock the enemies down for size. This card seems really good to me. If you play on 5 or 6 power and you Valkyrie Warp off top of your deck, you play Steyer's Beckoning and then Curfew Enforcement, and you get to amplify right away. You can't amplify if you play it on 4 with only 4 power remaining, but if you have more than 4, you can't amplify it even. So it's an interesting card because it gets the agenda a lot faster than other sites. While it does only have 2 health, which can be targeted, there are very few sites in the game that play units when you play them, and this is now one of the few, especially for so cheap. Like, I don't think there's any sites for this cheap that play units. I spoke for a while. I mean, I had to explain the card. It's a big, complicated card. Anyways, Sunny, what do you think of this card so I don't just monopolize the time?
I hate this card already. I don't think it's good. Like, the ways it interacts with the board aren't that good in a general sense or anything. It's just that, like, you're going to play against someone and they're going to Valkyrie Warp it on turn 5 or something. They're going to play 2 Valkyries, shrink your board by 2, and, like, you just can't get through them or whatever because they already have Valkyrie in play. So you're going to take your turn and do whatever, and then they're going to play the +4/+4 and wait for it to go off the following turn. And you're going to have to attack into it, make bad attacks, maybe attack into a Defiance or something. The Valkyrie deck might not be playing Defiance, but like it's just going to go off because it Valkyrie Warp. Like, it's already unreasonable when people warp cards against you. And then on top of that, like, when they do get the Valkyrie Warp, you just can't deal with it. So they get a free card and you can't deal with it, but only when they Valkyrie Warp it, because other than that, I think it's pretty mediocre. So, like, I hate this card already. I don't think it's going to get nerfed. I just think it's going to be a huge pain in the butt, and it's going to be like Aurelian Supplier. Like, it's going to feel miserable when they get to do what they want to do with it, and it's not actually going to be an insane card, just one that's really frustrating to play against that doesn't have a whole ton of counterplay.
I mean, I disagree slightly. I think it has perhaps more than you're giving credit for. Yeah, the Valkyrie Warp part is going to be very dumb on 6 power when you can Valkyrie Warp, put out the 2 Valkyries, and then immediately amplify them. That'll feel very unfair. But I like that the card also has a lot of interesting deck building opportunities for it, right? You can play it in an aggro deck relying more on Ironclad Oath to push damage, or you can sort of play it in more of a control deck and rely on the Curfew Enforcement and the blockers to try to get to Rhoda. It's this weird card that kind of fits into many decks, and I like the deck building challenge of it. I'm not sure how much I care about Valkyrie Warp. Valkyrie Warp, let's be honest, friends of Eternal, Valkyrie Warp is just a weird random mechanic that just feels awkward and clunky. Like, just feels weird, right? Like, you guys agree? I don't know. Comment on this below if you want to.
Yeah, I guess we haven't really talked that much about Valkyrie Warp, but it's like when your opponent warps something against you, you feel miserable anyway. Like, it doesn't feel great. They got a card for free. And when they get an additional effect on top of that, it just adds insult to injury. So I think Direwolf does an amazing job of making Eternal and making great, exciting mechanics that are unique and whatnot. This is not one I'm a fan of. I think I'm just going to hate Valkyrie Warp.
The fact that we don't have any other unit type warp in the set at all just makes the mechanic just feel like really strange. Like, why is this the only unit type that gets the warp effect? The other problem with Valkyrie Warp compared to even regular warp is that it's kind of like a win more mechanic, right? Because you have to have a Valkyrie in play to warp it. So, like, if you're behind, you don't have any units in play, you don't have Valkyrie in play, you can't warp it. And if you're ahead, you get to get more ahead. So it's just kind of a weird mechanic all around. Like, thematically, mechanically, gameplay-wise, maybe it'll play better than it looks, but I have my doubts.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next card. Plea for Aid. This was a really interesting one. 4 cost double justice spell. Play a unit of your choice with cost 1 or less from your deck. Amplify, pay 1 armor to increase the cost by 1. I don't know how good this card is. It seems extremely hard to set up, but boy, if you can go something like double reinforce at the end of your opponent's turn and then plea for aid, that seems like a lot of fun. Or like you get down super low, you reinforce at the end of turn. All these lines include reinforce at the end of turn, by the way. And then you play a Stormhalt Knife for free, and then you plea for aid, and you can get any unit you want. So I think that's pretty interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see what combos people come up with this, whether they go for a toolbox deck or if they have one that's just really armor focused. And I don't even know what you'd be doing at that point, but like how you're going to get the armor for this card and then what targets you're going to get, it seems really interesting. It's definitely pretty unlike any cards that we have right now.
Yeah, this card, you can also look at like any random card in the set as well that we haven't discussed, and it will also, give you these like weird deck building challenges to meet and try to maximize. Because like there's so many ways to maximize this card. You can go for like the Scourge of Frostholm route, where your goal is to get to 10 armor, and your goal is to plea for 8 for 10 armor to play Scourge of Frostholm. Or you can go for like a toolbox route where you're playing like your Jade Hordes and your Siphoner Paladins and maybe your Nightmare Gates, and you're trying to play like a Nightmare Gates deck where you use plea for 8 as a way to tutor out something. Or you can sort of go for the other route of maybe playing it with, very small armor effects or even no armor effects, and your goal is just use it to tutor for a 1-drop, right? It's kind of like a Crown Watch Press King in that capacity. I go back and forth. When I think about this card too much, I start to like question it, but then it's like, it also seems like it's got weird things going on. Like it's kind of like a reweave. It's a weird card. Compared to like Failure Exchange and stuff, like every card in the set's just weird like this. But yeah, this card seems potentially busted, but also potentially doesn't end up having any impact except, in sort of meme decks.
Yeah, I don't think that this card is good. I think it's too many hoops to jump through, but it's really unique and it has potential to be good. All right, let's talk about a card that I'm pretty sure is just very good. Daru Lee, 1 cost, 2/1 mage soldier with a single primal influence. Primal 1-drop. Once per turn, you may pay 1 and exhaust another soldier to give Daru Lee +3/+3 this turn. And amplify 5, transform another unit into a 5/5 dragon simulacre with flying. So this is kind of like a reverse Pyro Knight, where if you play it on 6, then you get to send one of your units into the air and attack for 5. And just as a 1-drop, it's pretty solid. Like I can imagine situations where you play Daru Lee, then you play another 1-drop and you exhaust it, and you just attack for 5 in the air. Or situations where you play a normal game plan and your opponent stabilizes, quote unquote, stabilizes at 5 life, then you just jump your Daru that is on the board and kill them. So like it's got good closing speed. It's a good turn 1 play. It's even good late in the game because you can, turn one of your other units into a dragon. I'm not sure I love this being a legendary card because it seems like that's going to keep a lot of aggro players from building the aggro deck because they're going to need 4 of these, but yeah. Oh, okay, so here we go. Stormblessed just added a card to go along with it. Why don't you describe what you did?
Yeah, so basically the key for Daru Lee is that you want to be playing a bunch of cheap soldiers, right? Because the goal is you play Daru Lee on 1, you play another 1-drop on 2, and then you exhaust the other 1-drop and you attack for 5. So I was like, okay, what cheap soldiers do we have? Now, I think there might be a couple other cheap soldiers that cost 1 beforehand, but here's one. Shock Troops is a 1-cost 1/1 soldier. Well, that doesn't sound so good, but it has an ultimate. When you amplify a card, just play a 3/3 weapon on it. So any amplify you do at all turns this into a 4/4, whether it's through Daru Lee or other things. The fact that this is a soldier deck and soldiers have just a bunch of cards that just randomly have amplify on them, this card might just pair really well. I think Daru Lee is obviously powerful, right? It's a 1-cost 2/1 that can attack, for 5 on turn 2 or 3 or whatever. The other thing this does, if this card or Cast Iron Furnace are busted and need to be nerfed, it makes it very awkward because they both generate the same token, which means it's hard to nerf the token because if that's where you want to go to make either of these cards weaker, if they end up proving to be too powerful, you'd have to make both of them weaker. Yeah, it's a 1-drop that also has a big effect late game, right? That's what you want out of 1-drops. If you top deck Daru Lee late game, it also produces a 5/5 dragon. So yeah, card's just great.
Yeah. So Stormblessed, you know what a really good 1-drop soldier is? Daru Lee.
Oh my god.
You just play this amongst, you have 2 Daru Lees. All of a sudden they're better. I wouldn't be surprised if this card gets nerfed. It seems very, very good for a 1-drop.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the next one. You're the one who wanted to put this one out. It's Cyber Combustion. Sacrifice a unit to deal 3 damage to each non-Grandin unit. It's like a 2-cost Hailstorm in Primal, but for Grenadin decks against non-Grenadin decks.
Well, see, I thought that too for a second. But you don't need to sacrifice a Grenadin. You sacrifice any unit.
Oh, yeah.
So that makes the card significantly better.
But, like, you're not going to play a deck that has a ton of units and have them just be swept up by this. Like, you want to sacrifice Grandin so that your other Grandins are... Or you want to play it in Grandin's deck so that your units are immune to the effect.
The fact that you don't need to sacrifice a Grenadin unit does mean that it opens up opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be there, which is nice. Let's just be clear. So the main reason that this needs to be mentioned is that this is the premium board clear in Expedition right now. I think this is maybe the only, actual way to deal with big boards. Like, obviously, you can't deal with Grenadin boards, but dealing 3 damage to everything is a powerful effect. You've seen it with Hailstorm. This costs 2. That, it's something that's worth keeping in mind. In Throne, you probably will just only play some Grenadin decks in the market, or you're playing Hailstorm, right? Because the tension, as Sunny said, is there if you're not playing Grenadin deck of you don't really want to play units that you want to sacrifice while also wanting to deal 3 to the board. So there's that tension there in Throne. But in Expedition, where you don't have the ability to play Hailstorm, I think this card will be very important there.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one. This is Pinnacle of the Reach. It's another one of the mirrored relics. It costs 3. It's single primal. At the start of each player's turn, they draw an additional card. I think only one word is needed to describe this card, and that is Maul.
I didn't even think about Maul. I just thought the card was terrible. Oh, Maul. That's a blast from the past. I took that to my very first ECQ. It was the only time I ever thought Maul was good in any meta, but that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the card's that great. I guess it's okay, but it's like, it's always night, but it can also be double night when you play another night drop card. And you were already playing 3 drops that caused it to be night, so like, I think maybe it's better than your worst 3 drops in that type of deck. I don't think it's a good card. Like, I don't think it's a good deck, but I do think that, like, it is good in that strategy.
You can play Dejero's Ruin to force them to take the damage off the additional card. It's going to be me. If you played Magic the Gathering, you will know a card called Howling Mine. I think this card will produce some very fun decks, but perhaps not tier 1 decks. So I'm going to move on if Sunny's okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, the next card is a very good card. It looks very powerful. Do you guys like drawing specific cards to your deck, which is called tutoring? Because we got this very cool tutor here. 3 and a primal for a fast spell like Dragonforge called Realign the Stars. Draw a card with Amplify of your choice from your deck. So as mentioned earlier, card we mentioned, Overloader and Diabolic Machinations. If you go into a Fire Primal Shadow build, this allows you to tutor up one of your combo pieces. In general, though, if you can also play a toolbox strategy, right? If you're playing, a Justice Primal Shadow deck, you can tutor up your Know Thy Enemy if you really want to do that. I know that I say Know Thy Enemy a lot, but I don't think it's even that bad of an option, right? Just if you're playing like a couple different Amplify cards, this just is the best card in your deck a lot of the time. Card seems very powerful, especially compared to like a card like Dragonforge, where this doesn't have the cost reduction, but Amplify cards tend to be more varied than dragons, so you tend to get a variety of effects, which makes the tutoring part a little bit stronger.
Yeah, you don't have to amplify the cards for them to be something that you can get off of Realign the Stars. Like, you can get, for example, Burn Them All or something without any intention of amplifying it. Or the 3 cost, I forget what it's called. The 3 cost one that does 4 damage. Anyway, you can get any cards, but I think the real power of this is that the combo potential with cards that we've mentioned, so like Overloader and this in a combo. Outside of it, I don't think it's worth paying 3 in Eternal to tutor for a card most of the time. But Stormblessed makes a good point. It's better than Dragonforge because the cards it can get are much more varied. All right, let's go on to Shadow. The first card I think is just a role player, Darkwater Vines. It's a 1-cost Mandrake, a single shadow. Has regen and ultimate. When any player discards a card, Darkwater Vines gets +1 attack, and each player discards the bottom 4 cards of their deck. I think that this is going to replace like Spite Feeder or one of the lesser mill cards out of a Reanimator deck. It doesn't discard any cards on its own, but as soon as one card is discarded, you do get to discard 4 cards, which is a whole lot more than 2, and I've definitely played Spite Feeder before. So I think it's just going to be a solid role player to help you mill in those types of decks.
I think this is one of the best cards in the set, actually.
Oh, interesting. So like the
Yeah.
ability to be an enabler is just so powerful and so rare that you think it's one of the best ones. All right, I can buy that.
Well, one of the things I think is one of the best card set is that, again, it has the power to be a very solid enabler role player in a reanimator style deck. Being a 2-1 regen is also not nothing, because the problem with reanimator is obviously that you need to be able to survive the early game to get to your reanimation. This allows you to either block 2 enemy stuff. It prevents overwhelm, right? If they attack with champion or fury, you get to prevent all that overwhelm, or they have to invest double removal spell into it to get rid of it. It also is a very solid aggro card as well. There's a really cool aggro self mill deck that I know Batteries is working on that I've seen, and we'll discuss another of these cards later down the line. But being the self mill option is just throwing cards in your void is really good. And if vows didn't exist, this card would be a lot worse. But you can play this on 1 and then turn 2 play a vow and then discard like a faceless one or something, and just start getting value. I think this card is really good. Being a 2-1 regen for 1 is really good in a aggro deck, and milling 4 cards for the body of your deck is also going to be really good. So I just think all around this card is great.
Yeah. All right, next card, Exploit. I mentioned in the Discord, distracted boyfriend meme with Exploit and Mug, which is what it's going to be replacing. Exploit is a 2-cost shadow spell. Choose a non-power card from the enemy player's hand. They discard it, then you plunder. So you get to take any card that isn't a power from their hand, and you get to plunder on top of it. So it's basically Mug with upside for less. I think that this is going to see a reasonable amount of play. I think it's going to be very frustrating and unfun to play against, and I don't know why it has plunder. I think it's good enough on its own. The plunder is just gratuitous.
Yeah, if you've ever played Magic the Gathering, this is the Thoughtseize effect. Yes, it costs 2, where Magic it costs 1, and 2 is a lot more than 1, especially for a discard effect. But the game is also very different than Magic, right? This is a surprisingly unique effect for Eternal if you think about it. You can play like Vara's Choice or whatever, but that doesn't work all the time. If you've played, say, Time Justice Shadow versus a Kira deck, you'll know that From Beyond basically targets everything in that deck, and that feels really good. Like just seeing their entire hand and knowing what their game plan is going to be, and then disrupting it completely is a lot better than seeing half their hand and choosing it. Like if you Vara's Choice, if you play that and you see their hand, you don't get to know what spells, in a Kira deck, you don't know what spells they have. You don't know what game plan they're going for. Seeing their whole hand with From Beyond is just one step above that. And this card is that. And it has, the fact that it has Plunder is just, as Sunny says, very gratuitous. I mean, Plunder's really good. Like, if you've never played with Plunder, and I assume you have, but Plunder's just so good. And if you're playing this, you're playing it maybe a tempo, if you're playing Control, we have lots of ways to make fake digital cardboard. And if you just have a fake piece of digital cardboard, you plunder that way into power, yeah, this card just seems great.
Yeah, and you also get to make an informed choice when you plunder, which is another thing. Anyway, next card, Shadow Creeper. It's a 2-cost 3-1 Mandrake. Nothing can have Aegis. Ultimate, pay 5 and discard a card to kill an enemy unit. I think mostly just having a 3-1 that says nothing can have Aegis is pretty neat. Right now, the only card that does that is Baby Vara, and that card has seen a significant amount of play, mostly because it is very large and difficult to deal with, but I think there is a lot of value in something like Shadow Creeper that just says nothing can have Aegis. If you're playing like an aggro deck, the Vara has never actually been that great. I know a lot of people have played in aggro decks, but I don't think it was ever that good in aggro decks. I think that this is a cheaper way of getting rid of all the Aegis on the board, and that's pretty valuable. Also, the ultimate is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, you do have to spend a card on it, but late game getting rid of power to take out a Roland or something could be really, really nice.
In the Mandrake deck, it'll probably be a solid role player. You want to have critical mass, especially in Eternal, where you have less ways to filter, so there's more variance than in other card games. So you really want to have critical mass of your synergy thing. So if you're playing a Mandrake deck, you're probably going to play this because like if you're playing that deck that we discussed earlier, it has an ultimate that synergizes with the whenever you do an ultimate, do a thing, while also being a 3-1 that can block and attack. So is it going to be that great? I'd put it in a similar camp as Bastion Gatekeeper. It's probably better than Bastion Gatekeeper, but I don't think excessively so.
All right, the next card, Shadowsea Rising, another mirrored effect relic. 3-cost, single shadow relic. When any player plays a spell, they deal 2 damage to themselves. I think this is just going to be a situational card that might see some play. I don't think it's that great because like a lot of the Spellcraft decks are playing for Garden, and that deals with relics. And just like relic hate has been pretty popular recently, so people are going to be able to deal with this, but there might come situations where this is a really neat card and decks might not be able to beat it. So definitely worth paying attention to.
I think this card is the best of the cycle. This is the card I was referring to earlier because it's the least symmetrical of the cycle. That's the key, right? You want to break the symmetry. And if you're playing no spells or very few spells, if you're playing some sort of like Stone Scar aggro deck, for instance, that you also don't care about the damage at that point, you can play this in the market. If you're playing against some sort of control deck, you pull it out. You basically can force them to, make inopportune options, right? If you play this on 3, whatever, play like your 4 cost, charge a unit, whatever, and they play Garden next turn, if they have to kill this, they aren't interacting with your board. And if they're on your board, that's good for you. And if they're even playing Rune, they still take 2 damage off their relic removal. So it's still not like it's doing nothing. It's still doing a bit of damage. And, they don't always have Garden. That's the other thing, right? Like, sometimes you just make them have it.
Yeah.
And I think making them have it is really powerful. And the alternative is if they don't have it, they're just going to lose, because if they're playing Spellcrag, they can't kill the relic, they just lose.
Yeah.
So I think this card is going to be great in the market. The next card on our list is a card that I'm kind of unsure about how it functions mechanically. It is 3 Shadow for a 3/1 Valkyrie called Reappropriator. Now try to say that one 5 times fast. It has flying and regen, regen's going to play out better than people think it does. And it has summon, steal an enemy relic, while Reappropriator has power equal to or greater than the relic's cost. So if Reappropriator dies, the relic goes back to the opponent, right?
That's definitely what it sounds like.
And then if they play, your unit gets -6 attack for the turn, detain, the relic goes back to them as well.
Yeah, but no one's playing that in Constructed.
I know. I'm just trying to establish how the card functions, that's all.
Yeah, I love this card. I mean, just the name Reappropriator is hilarious, and also the art fits into that. So I'm a really big fan of it. 3/1 flying regen is actually pretty sweet. I mean, like, regen's like really powerful. Yeah, you're weak to Blight Moth and those types of minus effects, but you're not weak to Snowball. Sure, if they have 2 snowballs, maybe, but like it's going to take a snowball plus another card in order to deal with it. So the stat line is not bad. It just seems like stealing an enemy Power Stone on turn 3 just sounds like the best thing ever. Because you slow them down, you ramp yourself up for the next turn. So I don't know how good this is going to play out in practice. But I could see it being a pain. Like if you're playing against a Rats deck, you steal their Rat Cage and they only have one thing that actually deals damage to Reappropriator and they can't kill it for good. I think against decks that are playing relics on the early turns, where it might not be worth it to get a relic removal card because the relics are so cheap, this might be a good countermeasure to that.
Yeah, regen's gonna play better than it looks. I really think that. Yes, Equivocate and Annihilate get to kill it through regen, which I think is for the best, but like versus fire decks, I don't know what fire deck is also playing relics. I guess Praxis. It'll play well versus a Praxis ramp deck. Although if you steal Reactor Forge, you might just kill yourself. But but yeah, the thing is, the base case of the card is that it's a 3-cost 3/1 flying regen, which if you're playing an aggro deck, that's not a terrible stat line to be, right? Like if you've played Valkyrie Enforcer, you know that sometimes just a 3/3 flyer in your aggro hero deck is just good enough. And this is, I think, a 3/1 flying regen is better than a 3/3 flyer on average. So I think the card's probably fairly decent.
Yeah. Let's talk about another flyer from Shadow. This is Arak Razor Shaper. Eric Razor Shaper? I don't know how to pronounce that. Arach. It's a 4-cost double shadow 1/3 flying Valkyrie. When one of your Grenadin dies, each unit and weapon in your hand gets +1 attack. Summon, play 1/1 Razor Bots with deadly equal to Arak's attack. So if somehow this is buffed to a 3/3 in your hand, you would get 3 Razor Bots when you play it. Or at least I'm pretty sure that's how it works. This one, I don't think it's anything too special, but it is a unit that comes with an army, and those units are always interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's sort of where my head was at. I feel like it's somewhat comparable to that, remember the one that was a 1/1 deadly unblockable that summoned a Timekeeper?
Twin Spiteling.
Yeah, this is sort of like a Twin Spiteling, but unlike Twin Spiteling, it doesn't require you to be in Xenon. This is just Shadow X. So It really depends on if there's a good, effective way to buff cards in your hand. Yes, there's a couple cards that buff cards in your hand, like Explosive Potential, but Explosive Potential also looks terrible. But the card has potential to get there because it has, as Sunny said, a body in a can, right? Producing a bunch of 1/1 deadlies is going to be a good way to go up the ground or, push damage with, some sort of rally. Or if you're playing a sacrifice deck, right? Making multiple bodies will be good. If you can even make this 2 power even, it probably is good enough in a sacrifice deck. So it really depends on if you can bump its power at all and any capacity. But if you can, I think the card probably is good enough.
They need to stop doing this. So you know what card might be good with Erek Razor Shaper?
I do not.
Erek Razor Shaper, like the first one buffs the second one because when your Grandin's dying,
No, I did notice that because you have it in hand and a Grandin dies, then suddenly your other Arak is now bigger, and then the third Arak buffs the other. It is kind of funny, just like Daru Lee. It's like you don't want to play one Arak, you want to play 4 Araks or no Araks.
Yeah, like that just seems like bad design, like a flavor fail, because units are best when they're supported by themselves, like additional copies of themselves.
It's kind of true. Like I'm not sure how many good hand buff effects there are that are like playable and constructed outside of maybe this one.
Yeah, I agree.
What are you gonna do? Play like the Wretched Rats? Okay, so the next card is a very interesting card. It's Mandrake Grasping at Shadows. It is Shoal Stirrings. 5 Shadow for a spell. Play 2 Mandrakes from your Void. However, it has Fate. Each unit in your Void gets +2 attack. What do you think, Sunny, of Shoal Stirrings?
I kind of glossed over this one, and now that you've read it and I'm seeing it again, each unit in your Void getting +2 attack on a Fate card, that's really interesting. Obviously, it's not going to do anything in your opening hand, but you can get it from the market, and then all of a sudden, whatever units you're getting back are getting buffed. Now, I think that Grasping for Shadows that only hits Mandrakes, even if it hits 2 of them, is like a lot less exciting because Grasping at Shadows does some truly busted things. But all the parts of this card added together, even if you're not planning on playing this card necessarily, like you have some other way of recurring units, or like the 0/1 that empowers to get back to the field, like all of a sudden if you have a 2/1 that's getting back to the field, that's a lot more interesting. We've seen tribal reanimator cards before, like the Wisp reanimator cards, and those were interesting, but I don't think they were good enough. But I don't know, like the having the Fate on this card makes it a whole lot more interesting.
Yeah, so you don't have to play the card for the Fate to happen. You can, use this card's market fodder if you want to, if you don't have any Mandrakes in your deck for whatever reason. The big difference, I think, between this and, say, the Wisp cards is that Mandrakes are better than, like, they're bigger than Wisp. Not better, they're bigger. They have ultimates that also buff them up and stuff. And if you play it again, you can redo the ultimate even. Yeah, and redo the ultimate means that, you can pump it again like that. The 3/3 that ultimates and then becomes a 4/3. Another combo you can do this is Ukzu, what's this? Uzu is a Mandrake even. So you just flip your deck over, you play Shoal Stirrings, get back 2 Uzus, and then you just crush the opponent with your Uzus.
Oh my god, that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, so I think this card seems really cool because the thing is, Mandrakes, again, Wisps don't have big things. Mandrakes have big things and medium things. Getting back 2 things is also a lot different than getting back 1 thing. So I think on the whole, this card looks very powerful. Speaking of reanimator cards, we have a card that just is frankly absurd looking. Like, as far as Eternal designs go and cards go, this card is going to be stand out once you read it and understand what it does. So this is Krull Zumik Occultist. It is 8 Shadow for a 7/7 Shaman. Now, its cost, its stats, they don't matter one bit. Because Krull is not that sort of card. Krull has, when Krull damages a player, play a unit from their Void with cost less than or equal to the damage dealt. It also has Fate. Krull deals damage equal to your remaining power. So basically what this card is that when you draw it, you will take damage equal to your power. If it's in your market, you'll take damage equal to the remainder power. If it's on top of your deck, you'll take damage equal to your maximum power for the turn. And then, because it took damage, Krull damaged the player. And so you then get to reanimate something from your Void with the damage you took. So if you top deck it and you have 3 power open, you can then get back a 3 cost or less card. For example, if you're playing a Darkwater Vines self-mill aggro deck where you're having very few power, but you'd love to get things back for free, and you'd love to be able to discard cards for free because Krull is not going to be played, so it's either discard or market fodder, that's a great place for it. It's absurd though, because it's a card that literally has a free effect. You draw it, or you draw it from your market, and it literally just reanimates something for free. Like, that's nuts.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential for this. I've been thinking about this since I, saw it a few hours ago. It is not going to fit in the traditional reanimator shells. Let's just get that out of the way. It's not going to fit in the same spot as that. There are too many moving parts. You'd have to do something like last chance it from the void in order to get a Vara back, and in which case you need the 8 power. Why not just get the Vara anyway? And at that point, why play last chance and just play grasping at shows? So it's not going to fit in these traditional reanimator shells that we have so far. But you're right. If you use this card as fodder, because you're never actually playing the card, it's just a free card that when you draw it, you get an effect. If you're using that for value reanimation, or you like pitch it to the market and then bring it back at the right time, getting the card that you need, and then on top of that, having power left over to do stuff after playing that card, and I think that's huge. You can come out with some really, really explosive turns. But like I said, it's going to take some reimagining of the Reanimator deck, and it's going to look different than Reanimator decks that we're used to seeing. Definitely has a lot of potential.
Yeah, you probably don't want to be playing with Katra, for instance, because even though it can get back Katra, Katra ramps you out. So this card, it does have a downside even. So if you ramp out to 12 and then you top deck a Krull, you will be taking 12 damage, which is a lot of damage.
But you know
so,
what?
Yeah.
Katra gains so much life that I don't think you care. Like if you ramp up to 12 with Katra and you gain, 10 life while doing that, and you take 12 and then you get to reanimate anything, like I think that might be fine. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting deck building challenge in order to figure out the best way to do this. Are you going to play 4 of these in your main deck, or are you just going to play 1 in the market? It's really interesting what the strategy is going to become with this card, and it could be broken. I'm thinking it might be okay because you need the power to play the card that would be backbreaking anyway. Although it is free, and anytime you mess with power costs, that's when you get into trouble.
It's free! The thing that I like about this card is that it obviously looks powerful, but it does require a deck building challenge. It's a crazy card, and I like it a lot. Okay, so another card that sort of fits in this sort of low-cost self-mill aggro deck is Shoal Dredger, a 9 and a shadow for a 7/6 Mandrake, which sounds overstated, but it has Fate. Discard the bottom card of your deck. That's, again, we're saying about free stuff. This is the free self-mill right there, which is very good.
Oh, it's free in more than one way.
No. And then the other thing it does is that this costs 1 less for each unit in your void. So if you have 9 units in the void, it's a 0 cost 7/6. If you have 6, it's a 3 cost 7/6. And it even fuels itself to some extent by discarding the bottom card of your deck. This card looks really good for a common.
Yeah, I think that this is kind of more on the enabler side. I don't know. It's like not going to fit in a combo deck. It's going to fit in a deck that is like aggressive and relies on critical massive milling effects, right? I don't know what Batteries has plans, but I imagine that this is like a reasonable part of it. It's also like doesn't have any evasion or abilities once it is in play. It's just a 7/6, and we've had some like Blurred Stigma Lock, the time card, that if you have lots of attack on the board, it's cheaper. Although this is probably a lot better than that card. Like, yeah, just a 7/6 that doesn't have any evasion or other abilities, I think suffers a lot. But it is pretty cool. That Fate is really interesting for decks that want to do this thing. It like the Fate fuels itself, which is nice. And it works well with that other Mandrake that we talked about, the one that cost 1, Darkwater Vines.
Yeah, the card that I said was one of the best cards in the set. It turns out that one of the best cards in the set also has synergy with another potentially really good card that maybe there's some sort of stew going on there.
All right, let's talk about some multi-faction cards. Our first one is Opum's Technique. This is a 1-cost fire time card. It's a fast spell. You have 3 choices. There's a full cycle of these cards, and I believe they're in the same factions as the paintings, right? There's one for each painting faction pair.
They are not, actually.
Oh, no.
Tesseract's Technique is in Skycrag, which is a Silex faction.
Oh, you're right.
One of the reasons I think this set is cool is that it eschews normal multi-faction design principles. Right, like there's not equal numbers of legendaries, rares, and uncommons in each faction, which I think is interesting. I think it shows that it's based like if a faction has a good design for an effect, it will get the card in the effect. But if it doesn't, they're not just going to force every 2-faction pairing to have a legendary, for instance. So I think that's a cool way to go about it.
Well, Opum's techniques, the 3 options are deal 5 damage to a multi-faction enemy, or give one of your sentinels +2/+2 and overwhelm this turn, or create and draw a random sentinel. And all of these have that last create and draw a random unit of the specific unit type for those factions. And that one is basically just there if the other 2 modes aren't too good. But the first one really jumps out at me. Deal 5 damage to a multi-faction enemy, deals with Roland, deals with Wump, deals with basically all the really strong cards that are from Argent Depths, all the really strong multi-faction cards. We haven't seen a whole ton of them in play yet, but it's a nice check on basically all of them. There is the 3/8, the Praxis one. It's kind of fitting that doesn't kill the Praxis one, but I don't think that one's seeing play. And it's a nice little combat check, +2/+2, and overwhelm to your sentinels. Oh, did I not even say that? Give one of your sentinels +2/+2 and overwhelm this turn. So there are 3 options, really 2 options plus an option to throw it away and get something random in return. So yeah, I think that this is going to be a good check against metagames where the multi-faction cards are too prevalent, because you can deal with them for 1 cost at fast speed. That's the cheapest price you can pay, basically.
Well, I mean, we have Bring to Justice, which kills things for 0, but that card is very powerful. So the techniques are all interesting because the power of them is, again, each mode individually is not very good, but that's not with the card you're playing. You're playing a full package, right? Most likely you're playing the especially main deck if you're playing a Sentinel deck. Maybe you also just play the market just randomly. Just cheap interaction in the market's always good. But options are good. Flexibility is good. You play the displays; those things are flexible and those things are powerful. Some of the techniques are less flexible. This card seems fine to me. It doesn't seem outstanding, but it seems fine.
Here's the thing: these techniques, the ones that we're going to talk about, have one mode that is incredibly efficient and very targeted toward a certain situation. This one, if your opponent plays a multi-faction unit, right? If your opponent has a multi-faction unit that they spend 4 or 5 power on, and you erase it for 1, you come out way ahead in that. So it is like a possible way of swinging way ahead in tempo in a game. And the problem with cards like that, cards like Swift Refusal, or what are other cards like this, like Ruin, right? They can have these huge swingy effects, but they are very situational. If you don't have the right situation for them, they literally don't do anything. And this will never be that, because you can always get a random sentinel. Now, random sentinel might be so bad that it might be worth nothing. I will admit, like, creating a random card in Constructed is pretty questionable. Just having the option to have a random 3/3 4/4 body late in the game adds a lot to cards that would otherwise do nothing. And then also all of these have the pump effect, I believe, giving one of your units +2/+2, but if it's in the right unit type. Any card that is situationally amazing and then has a backup plan, I've always thought that those cards are among the best cards. I think the emblems kind of fit into this, because a lot of the units off the emblems aren't anything to write home about, but power just has such a huge delta between when it's one of the best cards in your deck, because you need power, in the early stages of the game, so you need to play power, and when it's basically useless in the late game. So just being able to turn it into something that's useful is huge, and I think that this is pretty similar.
That's a pretty fair analysis. You want to have cards that give you multiple options. The interesting thing is that one of the best versions of the second ability, the +2/+2 ability, is for one of the ones that we're not really going to mention. But yeah, this one gives Overwhelm, which if you're playing some sort of aggressive Sentinel deck in Praxis, then that's very good, right? When you want to give your unit a keyword in an aggro deck, it definitely wants to be Overwhelmed. Especially if you're playing aggro Sentinels, I think Opum's technique is going to be very good.
Yeah.
If you're playing mid-range Sentinels, I think Opum's technique will be very solid. If you're not, then maybe just in the market as just like a backup plan for an efficient market swap, or a random unit out of the market.
Deal with Roland. Roland is such a jerk.
Yeah.
Especially like in Praxis decks, you generally don't have great ways of dealing with it.
Okay, so the next card is, speaking of aggro Praxis Sentinels, potentially, or even just like, mid-range Sentinels. In fact, if you're playing Praxis, you might just want to consider this card, because this card looks really good. This is Power Cell. It is 2 fire time for a 2/1 decay. And when you play another Sentinel, it gets a +1 attack bonus, so it becomes a 3/1. And it has Summon. Create and draw a Power Burst. Now, for those of you who don't know, Power Burst is a 0-cost spell that gives you +1 power this turn. So basically, this gives you temporary ramp. And it gives you temporary ramp while also providing a very solid unit. Decay means that it can contend with anything. It's not deadly, obviously, but Decay does mean that it will always, in a sense, trade up, right? It will always shrink whatever it's blocking down. So it, can do a lot of things. If you're playing aggro Sentinels, it can attack as a 3 power 2-drop, which is great. If you're playing mid-range Sentinels, it can block and help you ramp up to your other big Sentinels. And Power Burst is good in both the aggro style things and the mid-range and even the, ramp style. And notably, the Power Cell is a actionless card. So if you're playing, maybe a Furnace, a Cast Iron one, perhaps, this can help you get up to your threshold value to make some dragons off of it. So I think Power Cell will be a very, very solid role player in practice decks going forward.
I agree, and I'm hyper interested about any card that is factionless right now because of Cast Iron Furnace. I think that card is off the charts. But I mean, even if you're just playing, this on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you play a 4-drop or 2/2-drops, like that's really good. Getting a power ahead for your turn 3 play, that's a big deal, and then it attacks for 3, so that's great. All right, next card is another technique. This is the Skycrag technique. It's a 1-cost fire primal card, Tesseract's technique. Negate an enemy fast spell and deal 1 damage to the enemy player, or give one of your Grenadin +2/+2 and quick draw this turn, or create and draw random Grenadin. Now, I think the random Grenadin is probably better than most other random unit types because Grenadin just tend to be small and sacrifice fodder. So that's kind of neat. But the ability to negate an enemy fast spell or have a backup plan, right, makes it really good. So this is is it Swift Refusal or Stubborn Denial, or which one is it?
I think it's Swift Refusal because it's blocking the Swift card.
No. Swift Refusal says negate an enemy spell that isn't fast.
Oh, is it? Oh, weird. Well, there's another card that costs 1 and stops the enemy fast spell.
Savage Denial. Savage Denial, that's what it is.
This is a far bit better than Savage Denial. Savage Denial just stops an enemy fast spell. This stops an enemy fast spell and also pops face ages or pushes extra damage if you're playing aggro deck, which is what you want to be doing. The pop spell, if you're playing Grenadins, you'll probably want to play 4 of these. Now, stopping a fast spell is probably worse than Swift Refusal because you more likely want to be counting the Harshals of the world than the Seers of the world. But again, the flexible nature of this. As Sunny said, making Grenadins probably going to be better than the other unit types because Grenadins are the least different, I guess I would say. They are the most consistent, that's the word. They are normally small, so that way you can pretty reliably use this to get a small sacrifice bar. Yes, I know paying 2 for a Grenadender's not where you want to be in life, but if you have to, if you really need that sacrifice fodder, this can pretty reliably get you that 1 extra sacrifice fodder you might need to win the game.
Yeah, and I want to mention something. One of the decks that Savage Denial, which is the negate an enemy fast spell, is really good against is Kira, and Kira often has a face Aegis, and this can do a good job of popping it. I mean, it's basically mostly an upgrade to Savage Denial, but one worth mentioning, and maybe it'll find some room in a Grenadin deck or something. All right, let's talk about this next one. You queued me into this one, so why don't you go ahead and explain it?
Yeah, this is Short Hopper. It is a 4 fire primal, so it's a Skycrag card, 4 cost 4/4 Grenadin Kieran, odd unit type there. Summon, discard a spell from your market. Short Hopper gains flying if the card is odd, and it gains +2 attack if it's even. Then it also has ultimate. Pay 6 to draw a spell from your void and give it void bound. So the trick for this is to realize that cards called Icy Gaze and Privilege of Rank exist. If you discard Icy Gaze to Short Hopper, you get to stun an enemy unit because Icy Gaze says when it's discarded, play it for free. So with Icy Gaze, you have a 4-cost 4/4 flyer that says stun an enemy unit and also has pay 6 to draw a spell from your void. Compared to Chunk Chunk, which is a 4-cost 4/3 that says summon stun an enemy unit. This is just way better. It's easier to play because Chunk Chunk was surprisingly challenging to play when it was played back in the day. Doesn't die to Torch or Seer, and is also a 4/4 flyer instead of a 4/3 on the ground. So in that case, it's a lot better. But you could also discard Privilege of Rank with this card. And Privilege of Rank is a 2-cost justice spell that when it's discarded, you play it. and when it's played, you draw just a sigil from your deck. So, in a sense, Shorehopper becomes a split card. Either it's a 4-cost 6/4 Amber Acolyte, or it's a 4-cost 4/4 flyer Gerald Frostkin. So I think the Frostkin mode is going to be usually better, but the fact that you have the backup mode, and if you draw multiples even, you might want to do something there. But yeah, I think the card has a lot of potential, especially because its ultimate's not irrelevant. 6 is a reachable number. Like, games do go to 6, and 7 or 8, that's where numbers start getting just absurd, where it's like, that's just not going to happen much. But 6 is sort of like the sweet spot for expensive effects that are still plausible in a regular game. Not a ramp or super control strategy.
You know what I love about this card? So what you can do with it is you can put an 8 of the Huru in your Void in order to Western Herald on the next turn. Like, you play Western Herald on the next turn. And you still get to play Skycrag Insignias, which I think is insane.
Oh.
You can't play Privilege of Rank if that's what you're doing, but the 8 of the Huru being in your market means that you're not checking for it when you play a Skycrag Insignia.
Oh, that's really clever. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this card. It's not insane. It's never going to be insane, but like, it's big. It's got some interesting options, certainly if we get more spells that you want in your Void for one reason or another. Notably, it only discards spells, so no putting a power in your Void to get back with the Hourglass, or no putting a Fel Rock in the Void to, or like discarding a Fel Rock in order to. But like, I think that there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with it, because you're basically, choosing any spell and putting it in the Void with this card.
Yeah, it just is it's a very unique design that utilizes the market in very interesting ways, while still being not overpowered, which I like.
You want to talk about a card that might be overpowered and certainly does not work properly right now?
Yes, so this card and another card coming later are actually broken. They're so overpowered, they're so busted that they've been preemptively nerfed and they've been removed from the client. Okay, so that's sort of a joke, but as of this recording, they right now how they work is that if you have them in your hand, you could have played them for free, regardless of condition, regardless of influence. So that was sort of a funny bug. But I'm pretty sad because I think those are two of my favorite cards. The first one is Clear the Way. It is a 9-time justice for a spell. It says play 2/3/6 Road Makers, which is like, whoa, that sounds terrible. That's super expensive. But it has Amplify. Sacrifice a relic to pay 3 less for Clear the Way. So if you sacrifice 1 relic, you pay 6 for 2/3/6s. If you sacrifice 2, you pay 3 for 2/3/6s. If you sacrifice 3, it becomes free. So you can pay 0 cost to make 2 of these Road Makers. Now, what is a Road Maker? Because if it's just a 3/6, that's fine, but perhaps not, the most exciting thing ever. So a Road Maker is a 9-cost 3/6 that has, when Road Maker hits the enemy player, play a Sentinel for free from your hand. So, you can play, big expensive Sentinels. You can cheat them out. If you get this on 3, cheat them out. Now, where do you want to play Clear the Way? So you want to use cards that sacrifice. If you sacrifice a Waystone Gate to Clear the Way, if you go like turn 1 Relic, turn 2 Relic, turn 3 Waystone Gate, you can play Clear the Way on turn 3 for free, make 2/3/6s and an 8/8. Otherwise, you can play it on turn 4. If you play Waystone Gate on 3, you can play Clear the Way on 4, which is also going to be fine. What else can you do with this? You can use these other 2 new cards in this sort of relic sacrifice deck. We have Amber Lock, which is a 2 and a time for a relic that has summon, draw a card, pay for it, sacrifice to draw a card. Now, if you're sacrificing it to Clear the Way, you obviously don't get the second draw effect, but you might not need the second draw effect, right? Just having the relic to sacrifice to make Clear the Way cheaper while not doing nothing is perhaps good enough. And then another new card is a Restorative Process. It is a 2 and a time for a spell, draw an attachment and a Sentinel from your Void. So you can draw back the cards you sacrifice. If you sacrifice Waystone Gate and Amberlock, you can draw them back along with the other Sentinels you're playing. Now, the Road Makers are also useful because let me throw out 2 cards to make them sound cool. If you play Fair Exchange, you can take a Road Maker and swap it for any 9-cost card in your market, including, say, a instant speed Kairos. You can at fast speed pull Kairos out, draw 3 or more cards because you will have at least 1 Road Maker in play still, and then also still, do other things. You can also pull out Talir from your market at the end of their turn because Fair Exchange is a fast spell. You can also play Fun Stable Form to turn Road Maker into a random 10-drop. And then on top of it, to top all this off, you can also play this with Volatility because it's a 5 more cost spell that becomes cheaper than 5, which is exactly what I want out of Volatility. So all in all, I love this card to pieces, and I'm so glad it exists. Okay, Sunny, do you have anything to add or comment on my long spiel.
It took all of the restraint in the world to not cut you off at some point during that. So I hope you're glad you've had your fun. Yeah, I mean, Stormblessed pretty much laid it out. I think this card has a lot of potential. It's not too hard to imagine going turn 1 relic, turn 2 relic, turn 3 relic, turn 3 Waystone Gate in particular. Clear the way, all of a sudden you've got an 8/8 and 2 3/6/6s. And what you do with the relics that you played, if they had a summon effect, that's up to you. I just think that it's not too outside the question to have that be a reliable start to the game, and that is very terrifying. I mean, as long as a Waystone Gate is involved, it's like hard to go wrong with this. You get an absolutely huge team, and you know what card talks about Sentinels and is really good at stopping opponents from playing sweepers? Builder's Decree. So it's also, it would be interesting to know what the cost of the Sentinel that comes out of Builder's Decree. I guess I can look that up. But that's something that could also be relevant.
I've never played Builder's Decree, but if it works like every other card that has worked like that, the cost will be XX, where X is your maximum power. So if you have 6 maximum power, they will be 6 cost Sentinels.
Okay, yeah, sounds like you're right. Okay, that's just really powerful, and the cost reduction is huge. You can also, you don't need 3 relics. You can play relic on turn 2, like an Amber Lock on turn 2. Then you play a Waystone Gate. Then on turn 4, you play Clear the Way. You only sacrifice 2. You still get the Waystone Gate giant, and you still get the 2 3/6 Roadmakers. So really exciting card. Sad that it's broken. Can't wait to play it.
As a backup plan, if you want to go into a 3-faction deck, if you play Primal, you can play Bottled Storm, which is the other 3 cost, Relic with Entomb. I'm just super curious to try all of it, right? To try the, Primal version, to try just the Combre version, to try, the Volatility version, obviously. Yeah, card is very cool. Okay, so the next card on our list, I'm not so keen about, so I'm curious. Sunny, would you like to describe this card and then make an argument case to me why you think this card is one of the best cards?
So the next card is it's Customs Officer. It's a 4-cost 3/3 in time and primal. It says summon, put an enemy unit into its owner's market, entomb that unit's owner, plays it from their market. So obviously your opponent gets to reuse summon effects, and that's not so great. But if they don't have the answer for Customs Officer for whatever reason, I mean, you get to take out whatever unit and have a body left over after. It is a risky play, and I think it's only going to go well in certain decks that really care about having lots of units. But I've seen cards like this be quite good in other card game, and I don't see a reason why this to be different. It also is like kind of a drawback that they can redraw the unit from their market, but like I think you should figure that they have enough fodder in their market anyway, so that adding the extra card to their market isn't a huge deal. In Magic the Gathering, there are 3-cost 2/2 versions of this card, or 3-cost 1/3 versions of this card, and they've seen a significant amount of play. So, like, using this as a way to answer Roland, even if it is temporary, maybe they can't deal with it. Maybe they've been dealing with your other units and can't deal with this, and in that case, it's going to be really good.
Darulf obviously very intentionally did not make this cost 3 because one of the best decks in Throne, if not the best deck in Throne currently, is pause for Jarl, pause for Elysian, and pause for Relation Works on 3-cost cards. So the interesting note here is that this card has an Entomb effect. If you play Equivocate on this, if you teleport on this, if you just return this to your hand, the unit stays in their market forever until they, eventually the opponent might redraw it out. Or if you play, like, say, Fun Stable Form on this, if you turn this into a random 5-cost card, then the Entomb goes away. So there are ways to abuse this card beyond just the good tempo provides.
Yeah, and I guess you can also silence it. So I think it's definitely a card worth paying attention to, especially if you have some sort of strategy that just like relies on having a lot of units and wants some way of removing another unit from the field. All right, the next card is another technique. This is Argo's Technique. It is a 1-cost hero card, so that's Primal Justice. The 3 options are negate an enemy spell unless the enemy player pays 2, or give one of your soldiers +2/+2 and lifesteal this turn, or create and draw a random soldier. In other card game, I have played a lot of cards called Spell Pierce, which says counter target non-creature spell unless its owner pays 2. And this seems a lot like it. That card is, it might be unassuming because, like, it's just a taxing way of getting rid of something rather than a hard negate, if so to speak. But boy, that, like, it's so hard to deal with because I mean, people just use up all their power. More often than not, you're going to get something. People play Harsh Rule on turn 5. people hold up 3 for Wisdom of the Elders, and they're definitely going to play it, and you can get it with this card, knowing that they're going to, Wisdom at the end of turn. People try to go for their combo when they have enough power for it. So there's just like so many things that this disrupts. And the fact that it's less situational and less potent than the Skycrag one, the one that just negates a fast spell. But I mean, its flexibility is really nice, and it's probably going to end up dealing with something really impactful. Is also really nice. Not too hard to imagine getting a petition on turn 3 with this, and that's a pretty good exchange.
I think this card is a lot worse than Spell Pierce. Non-creature spells are not the same thing here, right? Because you can't counter attachments, you can't counter relics, relic weapons, can't counter sights. Like you could counter a Planeswalker with Spell Pierce, but you can't counter sights with Argos technique. You're really only playing this, I feel, if you are having a soldier deck. If you're playing like Daru Lee, then this card I think will be very good because, again, the flexibility is there, right? Being able to give your unit a +2/+2 in lifesteal while also trying to deal with spells. That's where you want to be with this card. You want to have the flexible option. I think the create and draw random soldiers can be one of the worst of the bunch because I think soldiers are the most varied, and also sort of the average case for soldiers is going to be a lot worse than the average case for anything else. But if you just have enough soldiers, right, like Maveloft Huntress, incidentally, is now a soldier. So there are some relevant soldiers. So if you just have like 8 to 12 soldiers, this could still be very good. Oh yeah, the last thing we'll say, sort of a joke thing, is that when I build aggro decks in my client, I always call them Argo decks. When I'm talking to myself, I'm like, I'm going to play some Argo today. So I think it's really funny that I got a card called Argo when I play Argo. Personally, I thought that was funny to me. Okay, so the next card is the other card we were alluding to when we talked about Clear the Way. This is Align the Tesseract. 12 cost spell for Primal, Shadow. It has play a 12/12 Tesseract Prime. Amplify. Sacrifice a Grenadin to pay 3 less for Align the Tesseract. Now, if you sacrifice 4 Grenadin, it costs 0. 3 Grenadin, it costs 3. 2, it costs 6. And 1, it costs 9. So you're probably sacrificing 3 to 4 Grenadins for this. Tesseract Prime is a 12 cost 12/12 Grenadin beast with Decay. Your spells have Decay. When one of your spells deals damage, draw 2 cards. So pay this for 0. Then you have power left over to draw cards. So I spent a long time talking about Clear the Way, so I'm going to let Suny start talking about Align the Tesseract before I get on my roll.
Yeah, this card's really interesting. Obviously, you can do cool things with cost reduction and play it for really cheap. The factions are kind of weird because it's double Primal, double Shadow, which I think it's going to be difficult to play this with like your typical Grenadin drone deck because those types of decks tend to like fire more than any other faction. So I think the influence is going to be kind of tricky. But I mean, boy, if you can go like 2 Grenadin drones and then play this early on and then maybe snowball something, whew, that seems fantastic. The snowball doesn't even have to kill anything; it just decays for 1 damage, and then you draw 2 cards. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Also, it creates an absolutely huge unit. Like, what's going to beat a 12/12? You can't even annihilate it because it's multi-faction. So, yeah.
Yeah, so this card I think is, I want it to be good. I want it to be nuts. Because it looks really fun. Obviously, right now it was super busted when you could play it for free on turn 1 with no Foul Influence, so that was obviously broken. But if you play this for 0, you play any spell and you get to draw 2 cards. The fact that you can play this for 0 and then still have power left over to play your spells, this could even be like some sort of combo piece. Maybe with like Overloader, for instance, which also happens to be a Grenadin. Now, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this is a spell that costs more than 5 and becomes cheaper. So you and Grenadin are in fire. You know what else is in fire that cares about spells that cost 5 or more? Volatility.
Oh my god. This is like the least likely of all the cards you've mentioned to
I am
possibly be seen in
contractually
volatility.
obligated.
A deck full of tiny units and like probably inexpensive spells like Devour and Combust, and you're like,
I'm contractually obligated to bring up volatility whenever possible. Contractually, it's in my contract, Sonny. Reread my contract.
Might be ripping up your contract if you're not careful. Okay, so next card, Cast Iron Furnace. We talked about this last time. This is, of course, the power that is factionless, deals 1 damage to the enemy player. Then if you have 5 or more factionless cards in your void, play a 5/5 Dragon Simulacre with flying. Power that makes units. That's been a good recipe. We already talked about it last week. We're not going to talk about it again this week. Okay, so the Speaking Circle is a 6-cost factionless site. It has 4 health. The enemy player can't have a site. So do we know if this gets rid of opposing sites? Because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds like if you play this, it will kill a site, and then your opponent won't be able to play sites.
Yeah, that's definitely what it sounds like. So the Queen of Glass's agenda. Choose between 3 options that cost 3 or less 3 times to set her agenda. This is crazy. The notable thing here is that while I don't think the average option is going to be very good, I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that you're going to get one, maybe 1.5 or 2 good ones or useful ones at the very least, because you get to look at 3 groups of 3 and then you get to choose which of each group of 3 that you want to go first. So considering that like a lot of sites agendas have some duds on them, this might be kind of interesting. It is kind of expensive. The Queen of Glass, the unit that comes out of this, is a 7/7 regen unblockable. Your other units are awakened and can't die while you have the Queen of Glass. So awakened just means that it's a unit type, right? That's what we have so far.
Yeah. Awaken currently is just a unit type. I think it's likely that Awaken is like Verit. Awaken is a plant for future stories, future, set mechanics or whatever. Maybe Awaken will do something in the future. Like it will awaken and it will change whatever. Right now, Awaken though is just a unit type.
Yeah. So I think notably the Speaking Circle is a really interesting anti-site. I mean, if you play the Speaking Circle, your opponent can't play their Dizo's Office. They can't play their Garden of Omens, right? And it kills anything in play. So it's a really interesting way of dealing with opposing decks that want to play sites. And it seems like a control mirror type card to me because I don't think the agenda or the unit you get afterward are necessarily that fantastic.
Yeah, so I think this card is very, very good. If you think about sites, normally with sites, you have one good spell, one medium spell, and one bad spell, which is sort of might what happened here because you get to choose what's relevant based on the game state, right? Like you get like Ruin, that could be terrible. But if you're playing against a relic deck, Ruin might be the card you really want. So but the fact that you can choose either Ruin or the not Ruin card might end up being very, very good. So in that sense, I think the card has a lot of potential. The sheer flexibility. 4 health is a lot of health, as we've seen. 2 health means that the site can just, lose its strength and fall apart. But like 4 tends to be pretty sturdy, and the unit it creates a 7/7 regen unblockable is going to survive a lot of things. It's not perfect, but again, just like the techniques, right? This is just a lot of flexibility, and the biggest downside of this card is just the amount of time it'll take in a game. Like if I play the Speaking Circle and you're my opponent, you're going to be sitting there for a while. And if you play Speaking Circle on me, I'm just going to be sitting there for a while because you have to think about that real hard. Like you have to look at 3 cards and then 3 more cards and then 3 more cards. And then you have to look at those 3 cards you've chosen to choose the one that's best right now. So that's just a lot of options to consider. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I think the card looks very fun and also very powerful.
I suspect that most of the options are going to be absolute garbage. Like you might get Pump Spell plus Sacrifice card plus like Second Sight or something. I don't know. I guess that's not bad because you get to draw a card. But like there are so many just absolute junk cards in Eternal or like situational cards or like Pump Spells or like limited cards that just really do not make the cut that I could see you having a really tough decision. But on the other hand, you might get Annihilate, and that is insane. Like Annihilate is not on any site for a reason. It's very, very good. I guess Cut Tides is. And it's even better than Annihilate. But like, yeah, you might get Triple Slay or something like that. That's absolutely fantastic. Okay, so those are all the cards that we think are interesting or worth mentioning. Well, maybe not all of them. In that entire list would include cards that we discussed last week, plus a few cards that we just didn't want to go into that might be role players but aren't super interesting or unique. Let's talk about some cards that you think are going to get nerfed, or we think are going to get nerfed. You've been waiting for 2 hours for the hot takes from this episode, and here they are. Okay, these are the cards that we think are getting nerfed, and by we I mean me, because you've stated multiple times that you don't think that any cards are getting nerfed. Do you have any cards that you think are getting nerfed, Stormblessed, that you have a feeling like this is not going to be the same in a year?
I'm willing to believe that Overloader, the card that you also think is the number one pick, because Overloader just seems very dangerous. The fact that like Hari defenses doubles the power, and then like something machinations basically means that you can get infinite power and then win the game if you just have enough health. Yeah, Overloader just seems not okay in the sense. I don't know for sure, but like I think Overloader is the most likely card to get nerfed.
Yeah, so I have 5 cards that I'm thinking of that I think are not going to look the same a year from now, and we'll revisit this episode and see how good or bad my senses are. So the first one is actually a tie between Overloader and Cast Iron Furnace. We've talked about Overloader a ton. Cast Iron Furnace, oh man. You could just play this with Interloper, the Stranger Interloper, and then you get 2 cards in the void for you. So you do that, plus you petition, and you get a treasure trove, and then you discard like some sort of factionless power or something. Like even a diplomatic seal is technically factionless, and it counts to the threshold of 5, and then all of a sudden all of your cast iron furnaces, they make dragons, and that just seems incredible. Like no power has an effect as big as this, and none of them certainly get it for free. Like none of the monuments are as big as this, right? It's Storm Dancer or whatever costs 5, and all the emblems create tiny units. This one makes a 5/5 for free. And I think that it's not going to be too difficult to get the threshold of 5 factionless cards. It's also not Fate, so it's there's another card. Broken Contract makes a 4/1 factionless unit. And obviously there is a cost to playing factionless cards, but like I'm already talking about playing Petition and Interloper. I think that you're going to be able to recoup that. Anyway, I don't think it's going to be trivial to turn this on, but I also don't think it's going to be too difficult, and I think it's going to be just absolutely insane. Because you can get the 5/5 and then you can do anything else with your power for the rest of the turn.
I'm not super convinced. If it's nerfed a year from now, it'll be because we got more good factionless cards to pair with this. At current time, I'm not convinced it's going to be overpowered.
I'm determined to convince Stormblessed otherwise. But yeah, certainly as time goes on, we're going to get more factionless cards, and then it's going to get even more powerful. All right, so those are the first 2 cards. The third card, I think, is Builder's Decree. I think that this card is a sleeper for just being absolutely outrageous and unfun and annoying to deal with. Like, I think people always underestimate how much tempo matters. Like how much doing things now and doing the right thing at the right time really matters, and being able to disrupt that for the cost of 1 or make a unit later on in the game and still have that disruption, I think is pretty incredible. Like if you're at 7 power or whatever, which you don't want to be at in your aggro deck, and you just make a sentinel and then prevent your opponent from slaying it for 2 turns, like that could get in for like 7 or 14 damage.
I will say I wouldn't be surprised if this card goes to 2 cost at some point.
Yeah, definitely feels to me that should.
Like this is bar the gates with just massive upside. Where if it costs 2, then it's bar the gates, but with like a side grade, right? Where the main mode of bar the gates, but a little bit worse, but has the amplify, so it's overall probably better than bar the gates. But at 1, it just seems very good the more Suny talks about it.
All right, the 4th card that I have on my list is Daru Lee. That is the 2/1 primal soldier that gets better with other copies of Daru Lee, I guess. So I just think that this one, it's going to be too hard to stabilize against it. I mean, maybe there aren't a ton of other soldiers in order to enable it, but I mean, like Pyro Knight was nerfed at some point. Granted, the metagame is a lot more powerful than when Pyro Knight was originally nerfed. But this good early, good late card, it has a lot of potential, and especially because it's like got a good middle section in it too, where you can make it attack for 5 in the air for just paying 1 and exhausting a soldier.
It doesn't get flying. It just becomes a 5/4.
Oh, geez. Okay, it doesn't get flying. I didn't realize that. Just the like art made me think that it got flying. Okay, but that's still pretty good. Like if you're otherwise stonewalled, like if you're attacking into a 1/3 or 3/3s or whatever, then you have a way of breaking through.
So I think the card that this is in some sense most comparable to in that regard, as far as like 1-drops that got nerfed, I think Shenra, the OG Shenra, not the Speaks, but the 2/1 that went from Mastering 8 to Mastering 10. I feel like this is sort of like Shenra, where it's like if the deck sort of comes together in the right ways, I think Daru Lee could Amplify 5 might go to Amplify 6. Pay 1 might go to Pay 2.
You're never getting up to double amplify with this, right? Get
No,
11 power.
no.
Well, I don't know
No.
if you get ice bolted enough times, maybe. All right, and the last card that I think getting nerfed from Empire of Glass is Exploit. I just don't know why Exploit has. Well, I actually mentioned there was one other card that I think is getting nerfed, but Exploit, I don't know why it has Plunder. I think that getting to choose any card from your opponent and then getting the option to Plunder is just a bit outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible this card goes to 3. It wouldn't be that surprising because this card is just way better than Mug in like every capacity.
Yeah.
2 is a lot less than 3.
Yeah. So the other card that I mentioned last week that we didn't actually talk about because we mentioned it last week that I think is going to get nerfed is Passionate Stonehammer. And I also don't know why that one has Plunder. That's the 2-cost, 2/1 flying Berserk Reckless that has Summon Plunder.
Oh, yeah, that card.
It's going to kill a lot of people. I like so many ways of making that really powerful, from the mundane, like slapping a heavy axe on it on turn 3 or something and attacking, to something a little more outrageous, like putting a Caleb's Persuader and drawing 2 cards and also attacking for 14 in the air. So so 6 cards in total that I think are going to get nerfed in this set. I feel pretty confident in publishing that. So what cards do you think are going to get nerfed? Let us know. Do you think I'm crazy for thinking that so many cards are outrageous? How good do you think Builder's Decree actually is? Because I think that's one that probably has a wide range of guesses, and I could be totally wrong about it. Let us know. All right, we've been talking for well over 2 hours, and I think it's time to call it a wrap, but we did get to every card we wanted to talk about today. Good luck out there. Have fun playing Empire of Glass. We'll be back sometime to talk about something. What do we have anything on our schedule?
I mean, we talk about like expedition changes or format changes or, Tuesday Night Eternal, or I don't know, or just like generic strategy stuff that we've talked about previously when there's been lulls. So yeah, there's a number of things to talk about. Decks that we enjoy.
I do believe that there's an expedition tournament this Friday for Tuesday Night Eternal.
Yep.
So that'll be really interesting. All right, have fun out there. Again, thanks for listening. Leave us a review on iTunes or whatever. And I'm actually kind of interested in reading out reviews on air, no matter what they say, just because that sounds like a fun thing to do. I've heard other podcasts do that, but yeah. All right, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. And until then, we'll see you in the friend zone. The Friends of Eternal Discord is the best place on the internet to get better at Eternal. We have players of all skill and experience levels, all happy to help each other out on basically any aspect of their Eternal gameplay. And making all this possible is our generous patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support FECast or Friends of Eternal, consider donating at patreon.com/Friends of Eternal. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, we'll see you in the friend zone. Sorry, editor.
Sorry, editor.
Because he's got a lot of work.
I mean, this is the this is the big downside. The new set podcasts tend to be a little bit longer than the regular podcasts.
Oh yeah, but that's how you get the clicks, Yeah. The clicks that give us all the dough. Not really.